Good afternoon. It's Friday the 7th of May, and this is Broadcasting Scotland's Scottish election coverage. My name's Andrew Wilson, and I'll be broadcasting for you for the next few hours as we watch and listen to the results coming in from the returning officers around the country, as we hear in particular around about 47 constituency results coming in today. As you'll know, and unusually, the count for this Holyrood election is being spread over 2 days, and so we will have the majority of the constituency results today, and then we will have the remainder of the constituency results tomorrow, and also we will have the list results tomorrow. And so we'll be broadcasting today and tomorrow for you, and we'll be commenting, as I say, today mainly on the constituency results as they arrive. The two themes that we've seen so far this afternoon are firstly the drop in the SNP majority in the first of the seats on the Moray Coast, but also we have seen an SNP gain, the only change in any seat that's declared so far, and that's the SNP gain for East Lothian from Labour. The former councillor and council leader Paul McLennan, who was a guest on Broadcasting Scotland only a few days ago. Paul has been successful in winning East Lothian for the SNP with a majority of about 1,700 votes. So that is the only constituency that has changed so far of the constituencies that have declared. And so we've seen so far a picture of the constituencies which hasn't changed a great deal, but it has changed in respect of one seat, which is East Lothian. The concerns with regard to tactical voting, especially amongst the unionist parties, the tactical voting does not seem to have emerged, at least in East Lothian, and as a result, Paul McLennan has been successful there. We're expecting to see results coming in for the next few hours. There have been power cuts in returning in counting centres, and have been the other difficulties which arise, and of course the process of counting is much slower on this occasion than in previous elections because of COVID restrictions and the distancing that's required between the staff who are manning the counting centres, and so the process of actually counting each constituency vote takes longer, and so that is why the process of obtaining results is going to have to be spread over 2 days. We're also seeing that access to polling centres is more limited than usual. The press are not able to broadcast live from every single gym hall and civic centre and community centre across the country. So the look of this election and the results and the feel will be different to those that we've seen in the recent past, and so there's an element here where the political parties and the broadcasters and the candidates and the local election authorities are all having to make changes to the way in which this election is being conducted, and so we're going to have to work as best we can with all of those changes. One other big change for this particular election is the much increased use of the postal vote. The number of postal votes has increased considerably, and I know certainly from one of the constituencies in Edinburgh that the number of postal votes returned, so the proportion of votes actually cast using the postal vote was north of 83%. And so it's clear that people have taken the message that was being spread widely earlier in the year to perhaps consider using their postal vote. It's clear that people have taken that message to heart, and it's clear that people are using the postal vote to make their voices heard. And so that's another difference that I think we are going to see in the way in which this election unfolds, and it'll be interesting to see if we are able to analyse if there is any impact on the outcome of this election as a result of the switch to postal voting by many voters across the country. country. Historically, perhaps anecdotally, it was considered that postal votes were used either by those who were working away or by those who were older and would not be so it would not be so easy for them to get to cast their vote in person. But it's apparent, I think, for this election that the use of postal voting is much more widely spread across the demographic of the country, and everyone has taken the advice on board to use postal voting. I'm seeing that for Caithness, Sutherland, and Ross, that the SNP Minister Marie Todd has retained Caithness, Sutherland, and Ross. So the she, of course, the previous SNP MSP there, Gail Ross, stood down, and so Marie has now become the constituency MSP for Caithness, and so that's technically an SNP hold, but for Marie Todd, it's a personal success. Which is encouraging. Marie, of course, was in the press towards the end of the Parliament with her chairing of parliamentary committees and the negative commentary that one of the committee members, Alex Cole-Hamilton, attracted when he seemed to be expressing his intemperate language and his anger at her. And so for Marie to be being successful in Caithness and Ross will be a personal success for her. Now we will be joined through these broadcasts by a number of people, and I think we've got somebody who can join us now.
Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Here's Kate Monaghan joining us. Kate, good afternoon. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Doing good, thank you.
Brilliant. How was your polling day? How did your 6th of May play out?
Well, I did go with a couple of candidates up in the northeast on a little bit of get out the vote, and it was raining and haily in Aberdeen, and then it was glorious sunshine up in the seat that you've just been discussing, which Karen Adam has just won. And as an equalities campaigner and disability rights campaigner, I'm delighted that she's taken that seat because she was a child carer herself for her deaf father. And I don't know if you saw, but when she won the seat, she signed to him, and I actually cried. And she also is mother of some children with she's also the mother of children with additional support needs, so it's excellent that she will be bringing that lived experience into Parliament. So I'm delighted to have been with her yesterday, the sunny northeast corner.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic. Yes, I think Karen was a registered full-time carer up until the campaign started. So as you say, her experience. Her experience will be really important for the Parliament, and certainly I didn't see her speech, but I certainly had heard that, yes, as you say, she had signed a message to her father, and I think that's important as well. Through 2020, with all of the First Minister's daily briefings, the use of sign language has been consistent and has been a feature, perhaps in contrast to the way in which Westminster broadcasts their statements, and so that signing and making provision for others, I think, is an important aspect of the way in which the Scottish Government has been operating, and for Miss Adam to be proficient in sign language and undoubtedly being an advocate for it, I think that can only help. Whereabouts in the northeast are you?
I'm in Aberdeenshire West seat, which is also a pivotal type fight as well, a very close majority of about 800 to 900, I think it was. And there's been a lot of work. We've got a candidate, Fergus Much, here for the SNP, taking on the local lead, effectively, actually, Alexander Burnett, who's our sitting MSP, and it will be a tight one. It's one to watch for sure.
Yes, of course, Mr. Burnett, infamously the wealthiest MSP, I think.
Almost certainly.
I'm pretty sure he claimed he's regarded as being the wealthiest MSP, and Fergus, of course, a long-standing SNP activist and worker, with a reputation along the East Coast for his hard work over a number of campaigns. So whilst I'm sure he has his work cut out in taking on a sitting Tory MSP who has resources and connections that will be commensurate with being the wealthiest MSP in the country, Fergus's energy and enthusiasm and creativity in the campaign, I'm sure, will, as you say, will set up a great contest in Aberdeenshire West. Thinking a little bit.
Sorry, he has had a fabulous campaign. He's put so much into it. It's worked, very hard. Nobody could ask more of a candidate. So if he doesn't enjoy success, it won't be down to a lack of effort, for sure.
Well, that's good to hear. I know that other young SNP candidates across the country talk in almost hushed tones of Fergus and his reputation for his hard work. So you're very lucky to have a candidate like that for Aberdeenshire West. Thinking more widely about the North East, where of course there are a number of aspects at play, including the prospect of the list candidate, Mr. Salmond. What's your impression of the way in which the campaign has unfolded in North East Scotland more generally?
I think it's been much harder to tell this time because of the COVID limitations. So normally in a campaign, you are literally going out and talking to everybody. You're knocking on doors. You're out normally within your own community and the wider community. People are in workplaces. Conversations are more natural. They're more sort of repeated, and you have a bit of a feel for it. And I've found that this time I don't really have a feel for it, and I'm sure some of it is those limitations on the physical kind of constraints of trying to find out what people think, and it's quite hard to know, really. So I actually am not very helpful this time around, sorry, because a lot of it's been online, and that's been good in some ways and more inclusive, as we've already mentioned, actually. So I hope some of that is retained, but you don't get the same sort of feel for how things are going that you instinctively do if you're out on the doorstep.
Yes, that's absolutely right, and of course a number of big ticket items have changed. A number of social considerations and concerns have changed since the last Scottish election in 2016. We've seen Brexit, we've seen considerable political turmoil in Westminster, we've seen the rise of right wing politics in England and Wales, and the election of Boris Johnson, all of which perhaps are then joined by the circumstances of COVID, both the restrictions, the impact on people's behaviours, and the impact that the politicking around both the performance of the Scottish Government and the politicking around the COVID crisis, the pandemic, are all factors which have not really been part of previous elections. Are there any of these bigger forces at play that you think may have a particular impact in the North East and in Aberdeenshire?
Again, it's a very strange one, because there are things like Brexit, which has devastated the North East coast fishing industry, and the farmers. It's extraordinary if they've still voted Tory in any significant number, and I cannot speak to why they would do that given their actual situation, when they have suffered financially so much from no longer benefiting from effectively handouts. I mean, if you have a business and half of your income comes from somewhere, why you would bite the hand that feeds, to use a cliche, I don't understand that. So I find it quite extraordinary if they're still supportive. And I think it might be more to do with unionism in that sense. They're traditionally more conservative with a small c as well as a large one. So it could be that in the North Coast, I'm not sure. Whereas Aberdeen, you feel like that was the FT and the New York Times said that Aberdeen would be the most affected city in the entirety of the UK by Brexit. So if there's any increase in Conservative vote there, it must be a bit of a right-wing reactionary thing rather than a Brexit thing, because that should be having a negative effect in Aberdeen. So it's really hard to judge, actually. It's quite complex. I think COVID perhaps has been less of an issue up here because we live fairly socially distanced anyway. It's very rural, it's quite remote, there's very low population, so we've not had as high incidents as perhaps personally as some areas of the country. So I feel like COVID's been less of a thing up here overall, I would say. And I just don't understand in England with the voting down there. I have no idea.
Well, that's maybe something we can begin to touch on over this afternoon, because certainly there appear to be forces at play in English politics as well, which for those of us of a certain age, and I'm not counting you in that, but those of us of a certain age find surprising or challenging. So we'll undoubtedly we will. There is a suggestion that we are seeing some reflection of those kinds of forces inevitably in Scottish politics and in the results that will come in over the next day and a half. I'm seeing in the background that the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has held Glasgow Southside. Of course, she was competing head-to-head there with Anas Sarwar, the new leader of British Labour in Scotland. I think it's being reported that Mr Sarwar has increased his vote, but not sufficiently in order to unseat the First Minister, which I suppose is not a considerable surprise in the circumstances, given the First Minister's approval ratings, if nothing else, across the country. That was one aspect of the COVID crisis that I've certainly heard being spoken about here a little bit, which is in respect of part of our community, part of our society, those who are shielding and self-isolating the most, and so, as an example, but not exhaustively, for example, older female citizens who would be in the house more and at home more have been, and as you would perhaps expect, it's being suggested that they have religiously, is maybe too strong a word, but they have consistently watched the First Minister's COVID briefings every single day for a year, and so the effect of those briefings, whilst they were not political, was perhaps either to introduce the First Minister in more regular terms to a wider section of the population, or perhaps to indicate, or maybe to allow what some might say would be the empathetic approach that the First Minister can express sometimes, to introduce that to a wider audience and to people who might not at first have been her natural supporters.
I think that's been a very interesting shift, because I think for the first time the First Minister has had a direct platform to speak to people that isn't what we might call mediated. So there's no sort of press agenda between her and the public that are hearing her speak for herself, and she is entirely compassionate, and it would be extraordinary for anybody who, seeing her contrasting attitude and treatment of the COVID crisis to that of Boris Johnson, to, if you had your own vulnerable older person in a care home, you certainly wouldn't want Boris Johnson to be the person to choose what happens to them over the First Minister. And I'm from Yorkshire, you can probably tell, and I have people, family and friends in England who say, okay, I get it now, why you regard her so highly. Because they usually see her through the poison pen of the tabloids, or the prejudices of the mainstream media, and I think that does give a false image of her. So other people see her more how she truly is.
Yes, please. Well, thank you, Kate. I think the point that you're making is certainly something that people will reflect on once we have a little bit of a distance from from this election, and we can get some context. We're also lucky enough to be joined this afternoon by Siobhan Tolland, who's a regular contributor to Scotland at 7 and other Broadcasting Scotland programs. Siobhan, good afternoon. How are you?
Not too bad on a knife edge. I've been at it all day.
Aren't we all? You've had a busy week running up. you've had a busy week running up to the election with appearances on national news media as well. How was your polling day yesterday?
Yes, it was exhausting. I got my jag on Wednesday, so I wasn't sure whether I was going to be okay to run about and do the knock-ups and stuff. But yeah, no, it was fine. It's been just an exhausting couple of weeks, but there's something about excuse the language, but working your butt off to get what you want, makes it worthwhile, I think. So yes, and I've just seen on the news there that Willie Rennie has retained his seat, which is not unexpected in northeast Fife as well.
Majority of several thousand, I seem to remember.
It's still quite a high one.
So a personal vote for the leader of the Lib Dems from a part of the world that has moved back and forth between the SNP and the Lib Dems over the years. But that means that Mr. Rennie certainly has been the constituency MSP for the last two parliaments now. So it's not a huge surprise there, and so that continues to mean that only one seat has changed so far in terms of these results so far, and that's the SNP gain in East Lothian with Paul McLennan being successful there. We're seeing Willie Rennie with a majority, I think, of about 6,000. I think 7,448. Which is on a turnout of 69%. That mentioning the turnout there is one of the topics of conversation that we've seen bubble up over the last 24 hours as the attendance at polling stations the length and breadth of the country became apparent. I'll ask you first, Siobhan, and then Kate will see what your impressions were. Siobhan, were you aware of an uptick in turnout on polling day yesterday?
Yeah, I'd been hearing rumours that a lot of people saying, a lot of young people, but also it was busy. Lots of queues. One guy I think somewhere in Dundee West was saying that it was the busiest he's ever seen it. And Dundee turnout was quite high as well. Well, certainly Dundee West. So it's certainly that's what the impression that we were getting. It is a brilliant thing, I think, that there is such an increase in engagement in Scottish politics, because I do think I don't even think it's just about the constitutional issue and all that. I think it's just a case of people are beginning to take Scottish politics and Scottish Parliament more seriously. I think COVID has done a lot to promote what the Scottish Parliament does and the importance of the Scottish Parliament. So I think to put it on that same level of seriousness as Westminster always seems to have had is a really, really great thing. And I think it's a testimony to how well our Scottish Parliament works and how well we do within that process.
I think that's very fair. Kate, did you perceive, again, Aberdeenshire West being a more rural constituency, the feel may very well be different, but did you become aware in the course of yesterday that there was a widespread increase in the turnout, despite the weather?
I mean, certainly in Aberdeen when we were there later in the day, that seemed busy. But I think I agree with Siobhan that there is that the high turnout is a good thing, and I think it adds the validity to any results, particularly being scrutinised by the mainstream press and Boris Johnson himself. He can't say people didn't engage, and his own party fought on the constitutional issue. Every single poster, every single leaflet was basically saying, stop Indy Ref 2, vote against this, say no to this. So we can't argue that it wasn't a constitutional conversation nationally either. So I think a high turnout is really good. I think it validates the
That's a very fair point. And Siobhan, Kate and I were talking very briefly just before you joined us about some of the bigger ticket forces, the wider forces that may have been at play in this Scottish election, which weren't present in previous ones. We were talking, for example, about the impact of Brexit, the impact of the pandemic, for example, and I suppose one other impact may very well be the expansion of the franchise. The Electoral Commission told us earlier in the week that something something like an extra almost 200,000 Scots had been added to the franchise, and I presume that they were largely younger people, with the expansion of the franchise to include 16 and 17-year-olds, and perhaps some incomers and folks who've chosen to come and live in Scotland. So in terms of these wider forces at play on the election, Siobhan, have you perceived, or have you picked up on any of these sorts of things having an impact?
I think that if you look at the seat that Karen Adam won, Banff and the Buchan Coast, there was she won, but just by the skin of her teeth, and I think that to me kind of typifies that tension between, that was the one area that voted leave within Scotland, wasn't it? And it was also quite predominantly no, in terms of independence referendum as well. So what you've got is that kind of element of these are kind of coalescing there. But I think in a positive thing, it was very, very good that the SNP held on despite those issues, the Brexit and despite the independence issues up in that area. And I think it's a testimony to how well the SNP have been doing. I've kind of been obsessing a wee bit, because I've been watching the telly since 9 o'clock this morning, but been obsessing a wee bit, there's a slight downturn in the SNP. But do you know what? This is our kind of, the SNP's been in power for a decade now, and we're holding absolutely strong. There is no other country practically where with that kind of level of sustained popularity is present, and it's quite a remarkable achievement. I think that Brexit has galvanised that. I think that COVID has certainly. I come in, Kate, as you were talking about the lack of mediation through the kind of First Minister's statements and stuff, and I do think that there is that element of a lot of people have saw the compassion in Nicola Sturgeon and the competence of the Scottish Government in a way that we've never quite seen before. To the extent, I think, where the Scottish Government has made Westminster look completely incompetent. And there's usually works the other way around, where Westminster just assume that they are better in every way. You can see that in the way that they talk about the Scottish Parliament, but I think the tone is changing now. I think the younger MSPs coming into Parliament are changing the tone. They're much more forward. They're much more positive. They're much less apologetic for the position that they hold, and they don't go on the defensive, I think, as much. So there's a shift there and a confidence that we've got, and I think it is things like Brexit and COVID that's allowed the Scottish people to kind of realign what they think of the Scottish Parliament. Going back to the increase in turnout, I think it's all part of the same package.
No, that's a very good point that you make. I was talking with Hannah Bardell, who's an MP, not an MSP, but I was talking to Hannah on the who was campaigning a couple of days ago, and she was certainly talking about the impact that the influx of younger SNP MPs had, and the looks and gasps that they received when they arrived at Westminster, and asked about all of the somewhat, how can I put it, arcane traditions and dressing up that is fundamental to the way in which Westminster operates. And she was reflecting on how on just how they arrived as a bit of a breath of fresh air. And of course, she has become involved in a number of matters with regard to the conduct of, for example, Lord McGuinness, where it is suggested that Lord McGuinness's conduct is exactly the sort of thing that a young person would not consider tolerating, and she took it upon herself to name him in the House of Commons, and the process then unfolded. So yes. So do you think for the newly enfranchised 16 and 17-year-old voters in Scotland, and I'm bound to say personally, I was really pleased to hear and to experience stories both of young people during the Get Out the Vote campaigning yesterday, young people saying, yes, I voted, I went to vote before I went to school, and also young people who were sitting in their uniforms having finished school. Kate, do you think that that expansion of the franchise is then the impact of that is then amplified by the presence of young candidates who you might, somebody as old as me might think, would engage well with new young voters?
I used to work for Stu Donaldson, who was the youngest male MP elected at 23 in that parliament with Mary Black. So I very much was very privileged to be sort of seeing up close what a difference that made, and for when we were out on the campaign, for young people to see somebody who they considered a peer to be standing, to be elected, to be in Parliament, and it was wonderful at the time. And I do think that the polling in 70%, I think it is, of 16 and 17-year-olds on independence actually means independence is inevitable now. And that's a game changer, having that measure, because once we know that the demographic will inevitably change and it's the elderly, older population or the right-wing end of the population that are against independence, but pretty much the younger generation are pretty much in favour, that's quite an impactful kind of direction of travel. And I'd also like to say that I am part of the SNP's BAME network social media group, who are fabulous. And I do think that the extension of the franchise to include people who have chosen to make Scotland home has been just such a wonderfully inspiring policy change. That's been fantastic, and I've really enjoyed seeing some of the personal stories about that we've engaged with. It's been very inspiring. So I feel a little bit like there's a shift to the future facing is young. It is sort of much more mixed. It's more diverse. It's much different. It's more female, more non-white, much younger, and hallelujah.
No, absolutely right. And Siobhan, we've in terms of the priorities for younger voters, I'm just noticing that whilst the SNP have held a number of seats in around Lanarkshire and slightly further west, the SNP have held Airdrie, have held Coatbridge, and they've held Paisley. I see that in Paisley there's a 5% swing in the constituency vote to the Green Party. Now, I'm wondering, Siobhan, with regard to the priorities that younger voters may have had, whether you think that will have an impact on the voting that we see across the country.
I was just thinking that before you asked that I think that looking at the regional seats tomorrow, it'll be an interesting one to see how the Greens do. I'm rooting for Maggie Chapman up in the northeast. I think that she's well overdue a seat. My ideal scenario, they would be Fatima Jodie and Maggie, as they would make a great working partnership, I think. But I think that the green issues will be something where the younger kind of audience or the younger constituents do tend to be more social democratic, much better attuned to the ecological issues that we're facing than the older ones, for sure. I think they put us to shame. They have to inherit the mess that we've made, but I do think that they take that much more seriously. I think that it does reflect a younger, as Kate was saying, it's that younger, forward-looking culture that's beginning to develop within Scotland that will inevitably take us to independence, because these issues are connected as one and the same thing. I don't think that young people see the difference. They want to be European, that's just common sense. They want to be independent, and that's just common sense. They want to save the planet, and that's just common sense. The three of them kind of come together, I think, for a lot of young people. And it will be interesting to see how the Greens do. I'm just wondering about the Green one in that constituency, whether they stood before or not. So I'm not quite sure, but it's a good result for them. Yeah.
That's a very good point, Siobhan. You mentioned inheritance there. you mentioned inheritance there, and I was just going to ask Kate to reflect. We're seeing perhaps one analysis of the results, especially in the Hartlepool by-election, is that apparently political inheritance is now no longer a thing. You are not apparently guided, or you're not persuaded by the notion that your granny or grandfather is spinning in their grave by the notion that you're considering voting Tory in Hartlepool or wherever. And so if political inheritance is now no longer so important in Hartlepool, and at the same time we're enfranchising younger people in Scotland, 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds, do you think that there's a shift away from the kind of family-based political allegiances that perhaps marked out much of the 20th century? Do you think those kind of corralling, or those kind of family and political loyalties are starting to break down, Kate?
I think that's probably true, that there is less generational influence in all sorts of areas of life and social norms. Social media has changed the conversation, but I do feel like this generation in Scotland are very politically engaged. They're informed. I think having subjects in school like modern studies, which is no equivalent of in England, by the way, I think those sorts of things are important. I think having had the chance to vote in the Indie Ref and then not being allowed to vote in the following general election for that 2-year cohort, of which my son was one, he felt disenfranchised because he'd been allowed to, I don't know, maybe it was the MSP, he was allowed to vote in a Scottish election, and then he wasn't allowed to vote in a Westminster election, and he just felt disenfranchised at that point. And I think maybe as grown-ups, we're not having the conversations that young people want and expect to have. I think jingoism, flag waving, all that nationalism in a nasty way, like Brexit, that's an excluding thing, a negative force, a poisonous force to my mind, isn't what they want. They want an independent Scotland in a quite different way, in the way that I hope it is, in a progressive agenda. But what I don't understand, and how I don't know how, I don't know if Siobhan's got more insight on this, I don't know how we extrapolate from the Hartlepool vote what's happening to young people in England then, because if you're 18 and you're not being influenced by your granny, fine, but how have you ended up voting for a Conservative Party in any of the poor north of England? I don't know how the red wall has fallen. I don't know what forces have caused that. So you would imagine that a younger generational influence would make a left of centre conversation, is what I'm meaning. And I don't know why that doesn't seem to be the case down the road.
No, I absolutely, Kate. I think there will be a number of theories expounded as to these changes that we're seeing. I think Alan Little, the broadcaster, was touching on it a little bit in the context of Scottish politics. His analysis with regard to the next phase of unionism in the United Kingdom being that unionism will involve telling Scotland to know its place and to do as it's told. And as a result, the democratic deficit that will arise as a result of that, when, as you were saying, young people feeling disenfranchised, an entire franchise feeling that it's being told what to do and that its vote doesn't matter, are great demographics. And again, for people of my age, a connection or a similarity was being drawn between what might be said to be a generation of Scots who were lost as a result of the imposition of industrial and economic policies through the 80s, which the Scottish people did not vote for, and now the imposition of Brexit. Precisely, and so a similar threat to another generation as a result of the same democratic deficit. Siobhan, are you feeling that there may be a similarity to be drawn between those two things?
I mean, the similarity in the sense, I think that in Scotland there was also the break from the established power, which was Labour, and I think young people broke away from that. It's different. It was different in Scotland. The established power was Labour. It was never really specifically the Conservatives, whereas down there, it's there's a kind of another established break from thingy away from Labour, but to move to the other power structure. It's blown my mind, actually. The Hartlepool result has just literally just it'd be interesting to see whether the engagement from young people was high. And I suppose that's the question I would want to ask now, is like, how much did young people vote in this election? Is this a shift to the right by the youngsters in England, or is it after Jeremy Corbyn, is it a step back and a disengagement from the political process? So I would like to see what the figures are there. I do think that in that sense there is parallels, but the massive divergence that's been happening for the last couple of decades, is that Scotland is retaining the social democratic contract. Scotland is retaining the need for a social security, the need for safety, security, the need for that we've always had, but England is moving increasingly faster away from that structure. The post-45 settlement is what we want, just a modernised version of it, but England has moved away from that. It'll be interesting to see whether the young people have reflected that or not. Certainly in Scotland, I think that the young people they're reinvigorating that process. They're modernising that structure now. In England, I just don't know what I cannot. And I'm a pretty smart lassie, but I cannot figure out England at all at this moment in time. It's just, they seem so lost, don't they? They seem so lost.
Yeah. I would just say, being English originally, so I feel like I can, and growing up in a Thatcher northern city where we went on Coal Not Dawn marches when I was a student, we didn't campaign the way we do up here because you didn't need to, because everybody voted Labour in the northern city. So the change is so massive from then. But I would just point out up here that we are very lucky in having the SNP, in having potential independence, that we can have a different political conversation and therefore a different vision of our future as a country that isn't going on, that isn't possible there. So there you still have a dominance of an old-fashioned two-party system where the left has been annihilated by the media, by Robert Murdoch and the real power, which is the money. So they absolutely, annihilated a Manx who didn't wear a tie, but they've allowed a prime minister that lies at every, the discourse is controlled much more by the press. Whereas here, I think the independence movement is much more a people's conversation, a grassroots-led, and I don't think there's anything similar to that going on. And it would be quite interesting, as Siobhan said, to look at the numbers of who's voted in Hartlepool, because it could be the Labour base might be attacking the Labour leadership actually and saying, do you know what, Keir Starmer is not the change we want. He is too much part of the establishment. He's not got enough charisma, drive. He votes with the Tories. It could be the entire opposite of what the mainstream media is sort of saying it is, which is, a kind of a Tory success. It might be much more of a Labour failure and a punishment. I don't know. But Andy Burnham, apparently his numbers are through the roof and he's going to get sensational victory. So it can be done by Labour if they speak the language of the people, which is what, for me,
and
the
well
SNP
deserved.
Absolutely. Because he championed them.
It's an interesting point that you make, Kate. And certainly I'm wondering now that sitting listening to you, I'm wondering now, and partially it's because it is still the United Kingdom at the moment, but also it's been our habit that we view, the national media, and as a result, we often view Scottish politics through the prism of English politics. partially because the parties are the same, partially because the electoral processes were similar. But of course, over the life of the Scottish Parliament, we have started to see clear blue water grow up between the two political systems. We have proportional representation in Scotland. We have a different franchise. We've had constitutional referenda, which were rather more fundamental than decisions about whether or not to have proportional representation in England. And so I'm wondering whether it's the case that as we move forward, that using the the prism of Westminster politics through which to view Scotland becomes less and less relevant. I'm wondering whether, as part of the process of Scottish politics and the analysis of Scottish politics moving forward towards the future, whether other countries and other organisations in other parts of the world may provide just as useful contexts and prisms and comparisons, in contrast to Westminster, which in that context is very much about the past. I'm wondering whether Irish politics or Scandinavian politics may provide just as much of a guide for us going forward. I should also say, before we get too theoretical in our political theory here, I have noticed that the constituency of Linlithgow has been held by the former Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop with a majority of something like 10,000, which is a pretty strong personal vote and supporting vote for Fiona Hislop. So that's from my perspective here. I'm in Edinburgh, so that's a Lothians list seat as well. So it's an interesting reflection, and also that because Fiona perhaps might be perceived as the next generation. We've seen so many MSPs standing down at this election who were very much who had been significant features in Scottish politics for 20 or more years. I'll put it in those terms. We've seen a number of very significant Scottish politicians retiring, having earned their retirements, and perhaps Fiona Hislop is the next generation after that. So, Siobhan, any reflections on Fiona Hislop retaining the constituency seat of Linlithgow with a majority of about 10,000?
Yeah, it's a good result, isn't it? I think it was an increase as well, just because it's in my head. But a big shout out to Tom Wills from Shetland as well. He just missed it at the post, but he managed to increase the SNP vote by phenomenally high, and he only just missed it. I think Shetland's going to go SNP the next time round. I think it's been that natural evolution. But yes, Fiona I think it was great. I just saw it on the telly when we were watching this, so I got slightly distracted. But it's an interesting. There's interesting results. We're dropped by about 10% in Banff and Buchan, but we're increasing in other areas. So it's very much on a knife edge. But there is that kind of SNP are holding very, very strong. What's particularly interesting is, and Fatima had tweeted this earlier on, that the Aberdeen Donside regional list vote, the SNP vote was particularly high. I think my stupid maths calculation worked out about 46-47%, something like that, which is much higher than what we would have expected. It's only one regional list at this area at this moment, but it is quite a hopeful one as well. So there could be quite a few shocks tomorrow. But yes, we have this new blood coming in, and it's quite exciting to see. I'm a big fan of Kate Forbes. I think she's amazing, and I think that articulate, that just that absolute clear articulation, lots of clarity in what you want, and absolutely no defensiveness, just literally straight to the bone. I think it's that kind of clarity that the youngsters are given, and the next generation will give us as well. And Christy McKelvey's just kept on to hers as well. Sorry, just apologise.
All right. No, thank you. Thank you. I've only got 2 eyes and 2 ears, so your help is very great to receive. But yes, it's an interesting point that you were making there. I think
I was going to add just there, Andrew, before Okay, I just wanted to add to what Siobhan just said, in that I think what we haven't mentioned yet is the equalities mechanisms, and Fatima in our region, who I've been fully
Yeah.
backing, and just the innovation, the creativity, the dynamic that the equalities mechanisms is and what it represents. And I think we should
Yeah.
be careful that it's not just about age. You can be very old, but your attitudes can be fabulously refreshing, challenging, innovative, transformative. It isn't about, we must be careful not to condemn older people and embrace only young people. It's more about a kind of newness of a national civic conversation, and including everybody in that, whoever they are, however old they are, but also, whatever ethnicity, whatever sexuality, whatever gender, whatever ability or disability. These types of things, that's the innovation, that's the creativity, that's the new Scotland that, for me, I'm fighting for. And so, I hope Emma Roddick gets in, I hope Fatima gets in, I hope Graham gets in, and, all of them, all 8 of them on the list. I just think it's absolutely brilliant, and I wish them all the most tremendous luck tomorrow. And thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to join you this afternoon. Bye, Siobhan. Bye, Andrew. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Kate.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your
No
help and your
worries.
time this afternoon.
It's been a pleasure. Oh, I would also add that if the one conversation that we also haven't had is, if you're the unionist parties, and we've touched on the negativity of their campaign and the toxicity, where's the positive campaign for this union if they think it's so wonderful? Well, I haven't heard one single positive reason to stay. So I think that's something else that is failing. Yeah.
But Kate's just
Okay.
leaving us just now.
Thank
We're very grateful to her for her contribution this afternoon, which has been fantastic. Whilst we've been talking there, we're seeing some more results coming in. We're seeing an SNP hold in Clackmannanshire, which was Keith Brown's constituency. We're seeing an SNP hold in Hamilton, and we're also seeing an SNP hold in Maryhill and Springburn. Although I think it's also being reported at the moment that the count for the constituency of Ayr is being recounted and checked. Now, we know that the Ayr constituency was an SNP target with a very slim majority, as I remember. And so the aspects of the Tory SNP conflict in Ayrshire, I think it sounds like they're starting to bite. Kate, thinking of Ayrshire politics a little bit, and I would certainly not claim to be an expert in Ayrshire politics, heavens, the closeness of the race there between the Tories and the SNP, do you think that reflects the polarisation that we're maybe seeing elsewhere in Scottish politics?
Do you mean me? Sorry, because you
Yes,
said
sorry.
Kate.
Sorry, Siobhan,
My
yes.
name's Kate in the bottom right enough, so
I know.
I should come
I
back
can see
on.
the two halves of my brain working there.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I mean,
Siobhan.
I don't know much. I don't know much about Ayr either, to be honest, but there does seem to be, in quite a few constituencies, a straight fight between the SNP and the Conservatives. The Labour are clearly looking like they're going to get third place, which is a shame because in an ideal situation I would have preferred Labour to get second place, but it does look like there's a bit of a straight fight in some areas. Just looking as well that the SNP are beginning to gain on previous. We're up by 0.5% in the overall vote now, so there seems to be a lot of tactical voting. Not a lot, but enough to kind of cause a little bit of a swing. So yes, I think that it's interesting because Anna Sarwar's leadership style seems to have saw a slight shift from the SNP into Labour by a couple of percentage points, but I think at the same time as well, what you've got is the Conservatives increasing in their vote because there's that element. If the union is your topic or your concern, then the Conservatives are certainly going to be the party that you would like to vote for. If the union is your preference, because the Labour Party, especially in this election, was trying to remove themselves from that kind of hardline conservative line, I suppose, and it seems to have worked to a certain extent. But in some areas, it's probably worked to the to the detriment of the SNP slightly. But in other areas, I think that it's been to the detriment of the Labour Party by the looks of things as well. But it was always going to be a fight between the SNP and Conservatives. It was never going to be much of a fair fight. I think it was it Wednesday, something dawned on me that never quite dawned on me before, because we all kind of assumed that Nicola Sturgeon would get in, but the thought of Douglas Ross kind of handling the COVID response just filled me with pure horror, and I think that, it's that kind of level of reality. I think that you get, God, yeah, that's why the SNP vote is holding.
Yes, I think the approval ratings for the First Minister are rising from her approach to communication during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think certainly it'll be one of the unusual and particular features of this election, and the way in which the personal approval of the First Minister has affected both the national performance and the individual constituency performances.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely right. I think we'll continue to reflect on these wider forces that may be playing on the election, and I'm sure that there will equally be a number of local forces, local political battles that reflect personalities and reflect local issues as well. I think we'll see a number of those, and we can continue to reflect on them as today and through Saturday, as we learn more of the constituency votes, and then, as you say, we then begin to see the list votes start to coalesce, and we get an idea of what shape our Scottish Parliament will have for the next Parliament in terms of its approach. But yes, you were seeing, I think, at the moment, as you say, very slight rises in the constituency in the total constituency share for both the SNP and the Labour Party. And we're seeing a reduction in the overall constituency share of about 0.8% for the Conservatives, and a smaller number for the Lib Dem. So at the moment, small incremental changes, only one seat having changed hands, and I think we must be at about 30 seats declared roughly at the moment. So it feels to me like quite a close race in many ways. There are no strong themes starting to emerge yet. So in terms of when you were campaigning during the week, what were the messages that you were hearing on the doors? If you were talking to voters and constituents, what were the things that they were raising with you?
I'm going to be honest with you. There was fear. That one of the things that I picked up when I was on the doors was fear. And it took me about a day to figure it out. There was a lot of kind of reticence to speak. There was a wee bit kind of door half open, like it's the Pro V man kind of thing. And I thought it might have been an SNP thing at first, but I actually think that it was literally a COVID thing. I think that people were a bit too scared to actually open up and have that conversation. And one of the things I was actually quite conscious of doing is every time someone opened the door, I would step back, because we always had our masks on, and I would actually mention that I was shielded, just so they knew that I was being phenomenally careful as well, especially if I knew that they were quite scared. So there was a reluctance to speak, if I'm absolutely honest. That's certainly what I found. Those that did want to speak wanted to speak a lot, because it could go either way. So I had a few kind of really nice conversations with people. But I mean, I where I was canvassing was kind of, it was one of the areas was Douglas, kind of very pro SNP, he kind of thingy the votes. So there was quite an interesting one. But I think the general take was that it was SNP because there was no other party that was able to do it. And it's one of the things for me that's always it's becoming increasingly obvious, and I noticed that someone was talking about it on the news earlier on, is that the opposition within the Scottish Parliament is becoming less and less competent, and that's quite a kind of sad situation to be in. If you're a big SNP supporter, then of course it benefits us, but the wider issues of democracy and good, healthy, robust democracy are a bit at stake there if the opposition parties are not so good. I had one guy who genuinely had a moral dilemma over his second vote, and whether that was going to be SNP or Alba. So we had a kind of conversation about that. But yes, I think, honestly, if I'm honest, I don't know if I should say this publicly, but I stopped chapping people's doors because I kind of thought I'm probably not doing them any favours, because I wouldn't want people chapping at my door, So there was a reticence, I think, to engage.
I think your reflections they absolutely align with mine and my experiences here in the East, that there was well, to an extent, people haven't been answering the door very much for the past 14 months.
Exactly.
And they're both out of the habit, and there's a small degree of anxiety associated with it. But also, as you say, for those who then gave the impression that they were missing having the chance to have a conversation with somebody on the doorstep, or having a conversation, to have the sorts of conversations that you might have socially or in the pub or whatever, that we have largely been denied for the last 14 months. That people were now, a certain proportion of the population were delighted to have the chance to have a long conversation about politics and other things on the doorstep. So yes, another example of it being quite an unusual campaign this time.
Yeah. I have to confess, I thought that the turnout would be lower as a result, because I thought that maybe people would be just a bit worried about physically going out and so forth, but no, it's because I kind of worried that it might mean less engagement, but clearly it's not. The engagement is maybe just not quite being face to face as we're normally used to.
I think that's absolutely right. I'm pretty sure there'll be a lot of analysis carried out about the extent to which the pivoting to digital campaigning has or has not had an effect. Undoubtedly, the parties are very keen on it. Whether it actually cuts through with the electorate is a different kettle of fish. Certainly, I was campaigning in sections of Edinburgh West, and it was apparent that you had a higher than average. The average age of the people I was talking to was at the upper end of the scale, put it that way, and it was very apparent to me that many of those voters will have had either no or very little digital engagement with the campaign, and that potentially is a problem. If there's an expression of, not digital exclusion is maybe too strong a word, but if it's the case that people who do not hang on every single tweet and every single Facebook update and every TikTok from every politician, that the way in which the parties have focused on digital campaigning, partially because of COVID, has perhaps excluded part of the population.
Yeah, I know, and
I'm seeing that Strathkelvin is an SNP hold, and that Natalie Dodden has held Renfrewshire as an SNP hold with a majority of just over 7,000. So we're continuing to see a consistent pattern of SNP holds. No surprise gains elsewhere. We're seeing the SNP now have 22 seats out of the roughly 49 that are expected to be declared today, and 3 for the Lib Dems. So we're in the mid-20s in terms of the progress with the counts and the declarations today. And again, the constituency share change is holding steady at small gains for the SNP and for the Labour Party, and losses for the Lib Dems and the Conservative Party, but not constituency share changes that strike me as being likely to be material or to signal some significant change of direction or change in voting intention across the country, I think.
I'm also hearing a rumour that Alba have around 2% in the northeast region, which fits in with the Aberdeen Donside figure as
That's
well,
right.
which was, I think, if Alba were going to win a seat, they would win it in the northeast. So it's looking less likely, and without getting too controversial, thank God Alex Salmond will not be in the Scottish Parliament, for the women that work there, to be fair.
As you say, we'll see, and I think it's a very reasonable conclusion to draw that Mr. Salmond's personal support would be in the northeast, where he was the MP and the MSP for many years. However, if Aberdeen Donside, if the constituency, if the list vote share is to be extrapolated across Aberdeenshire, as you say, that would be Alba on about 2%. Well, and at that level, it would be extremely unlikely that they would return an MSP on the list. That would be extremely unlikely. The one other aspect, I suppose, is, and again, we're not into the list seats yet, but we've had the benefit. Perhaps, and we were talking a little bit before about healthy democracies and democracies with a strong opposition. In a broader sense, I was struck that in the Lothians, I think there were 19 parties standing in the election across the Lothians, and I think that number is kind of reflected across the country. Some have had a little bit more attention, principally because of the profile of their leaders. I'm thinking of Mr. Salmond and of Mr. Galloway, but we've also seen a profusion of smaller parties also fielding candidates and participating in the democratic process that's fundamental to our society. Have you any having been through the campaign? Have you any reflections on the breadth of political engagement across the range of parties that we have seen taking part?
So it was like when you opened up your peach bit of paper. It was like a concertina, wasn't it? There was just so many parties, but it was interesting, and it kind of took me back to the early days of the Scottish Parliament when you had things like the Pensioners Party and those kind of smaller parties that were kind of trying to participate vibrantly in a new democracy. So it reminded me of that. There were some very new parties. I was kind of thinking that it would be nice to have just a bit more of that smaller party engagement within the kind of political process. Now, some of them were a bit out there politically, but but at the same time, you had things like the animal welfare. I think that was one on my list, the animal welfare group, the women's equality group, So there was a lot of kind of, I suppose, goodwilling parties that were set up, and it would be good to get that kind of sense, for me, that sense of engagement somehow within the Scottish Parliament somewhere. I remember being quite excited when the Scottish Parliament set up and we began to have these smaller parties, and I thought it was a great thing. And then, of course, I think it just naturally evolved into the bigger parties. But, in a post-independent Scotland, we can rework our kind of democratic structure to make room for those kind of voices, perhaps, in a more healthier, robust way.
Well, that's a good point you make. I suppose an example of that might be Andy Whiteman standing as an independent on the list for the Highlands. Undoubtedly somebody who has had an impact, a positive impact on the work of this last Scottish Parliament in terms of his land reform work. And I know that's something which is, in a sense, is going to cut both ways for Mr. Whiteman in terms of his political work. He probably stands out as one of the hardest working and most successful in terms of pursuing an agenda of change and doing what's necessary to bring those changes forward. At the same time, that means that as a working politician, he has much less time to be grandstanding, to be out schmoozing, and to be taking selfies in front of the Forth Road Bridge and all the sorts of things that certain politicians do a great deal. And so it kind of cuts both ways. But yes, I'm struck by the way in which Highland Council, in fact, has operated, not now, but operated for much of my lifetime, with a wide range of independent councillors on the council, and that it made the council slightly unruly sometimes, but it also meant that the council very very closely reflected the wishes of the electorate,
Yeah.
because it was very much it wasn't a voter to party relationship; it was a candidate to voter relationship, and so that closeness of connection, I think, made the council was a benefit to the council, and I think there would be an argument that the same would apply in the Scottish Parliament. I'm thinking of the force that was Margaret MacDonald, for example, when she latterly stood as an independent, and even though she was standing as an independent, it was clear that she had an effect on the workings of the Parliament.
Yes. Yes. I mean, it's funny because I was thinking about this the other day that, and this is as we move into independence, that, is there a way to, I don't know, is there a way to allocate seats to kind of smaller parties to give that voice, in some kind of way, even though they might not percentage wise have what's needed in order to, be within the Parliament, because, you're needing about 6% really to get a seat on the regional list, but a way to just find a way to incorporate those voices a bit better, because I think, like you say, there is that kind of element of the party politics can sometimes get in the way, and sometimes we need that independence to be kind of closer to the electorate. I think it works well in local council as well. I'm also slightly distracted because Rutherglen have just increased the majority by 4%.
You could see me just watching that feed as well. I was going to let you finish your point and then make the point. Yes, I'll say that Rutherglen has declared an SNP hold for Clare Hockey. James Kelly coming second. Clare Hockey with a vote of 20,249. And that represents a 4% swing to the SNP. And to be fair to James Kelly, a 3% swing in his direction, with a collapse of 5% by the Lib Dems. So a swing, a very small swing, but a small swing from Labour to the SNP in Rutherglen, which I think is, as we start to see the declarations from constituencies circling Glasgow, and as we get closer to perhaps bellwether or headline seats constituencies such as Eastwood, I think the direction of travel, if there is such a thing in this election, and there may not be, but the direction of travel of these seats that circle Glasgow may be instructive for us as we get closer to some of these high-profile seats, and we learn whether Jackson Carlo has been successful in retaining Eastwood, or if the performance at the 29 general election has been repeated, and the Conservative incumbent has been replaced. So I think there's clearly the stories around Glasgow are going to continue to emerge. I think we're expecting the stories in Edinburgh to emerge as well, with Edinburgh Western, Edinburgh Central, and Edinburgh Southern will declare today. And those, of course, include one Lib Dem seat and one Labour seat. So they've been targets for the SNP, but they are also seats that both the Lib Dems and the Labour Party will have fought extremely hard to retain.
Edinburgh Central was Conservative, though.
It was. That's right. So yes. So
it still is. Yeah.
Yes. So with the departure of Baroness Davidson to the benches in the south, that's perhaps a more open competition. But yes, the Edinburgh seats will declare today. So we're starting to see a little bit of a picture appear as we're now getting closer to 30 to half of the constituency seats having declared. I think we're starting to see a picture, as you say, we've got now 28 seats have declared, 25 for the SNP and 3 for the Lib Dems. So we're beginning to see perhaps the emergence of a trend, which is small movements and not on a consistent national basis, perhaps on a more regional basis. Individual constituencies seeing rises and falls in the support of either the incumbent or for, in the case of East Lothian, for an SNP win. So perhaps the broader forces that I was touching on beforehand of Brexit and of the pandemic, and of the expansion of the franchise, maybe the impact of those big changes is being muted, and we're seeing more marginal changes in voting performance. What do you think, Siobhan?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because there's almost this, I mean, turnout aside, which has been kind of the one big change, I suppose, there's not much change in terms of how people have voted. There's a stability there, and I think that that is maybe reflected in the need for stability as we move out of COVID. But that's not always clear at this stage. But as we begin to think about moving out of COVID, then there is that maybe need for stability. It's very, very similar to 2016 in terms of kind of just the closeness and in terms of where the SNP stand in comparison to there's no much surprise here. So there is, I do think that the voting perhaps reflects as that, how shall I say this, being an independent supporter, a need for maybe not quite radical change at this moment in time. And I don't mean that as a kind of let's not think about independence, but it's how we manage to forge that path now. We don't need earthquakes, we don't need tsunamis at this moment in time. And I think that maybe you know, there's been in England, there's a shock. Yet again, a kind of an electoral shock. Here, there's none. There's nothing that we've not quite predicted here. Is there? There's no massive. I say that, but 10 minutes time there might be. But you know what I mean. At this moment in time, there's no massive shock here at all.
You're doing your best to tempt fate, so that's fine. That'll make for a more that'll make for a wilder conversation, I'm sure. So yes, I'm certainly seeing it reported that constituencies across the country reporting an increase in turnout of between 7 and 8%, and I'm certainly seeing there were on social media last night photographs both of the First Minister at polling stations in the south of Glasgow and polling stations across Edinburgh with long queues of people getting close to 10 o'clock last night. Now, the throughput of voters through polling stations will have been slower because of COVID. However, that there were also large queues of people determined to vote as it got close to 10 o'clock last night has to be an indication, perhaps, that as you say, that coming through the pandemic, that people's determination to play a part in the election and to have their say in the election was perhaps greater than some of the pundits were expecting.
Yes, I think so. And I think that it is a kind of level of kind of people taking maybe just the situation, the Scottish political landscape a bit more seriously. It's just much more on the forefront now, and I think that's what COVID has done. It's also worth noting as well that Nicola Sturgeon's constituency, Edinburgh South, did a wonderful resounding rejection of Jada Franson, who was the woman from the British National. I think it's the British National Party, Britain First.
Oh, she's been a member of a number of right-wing fringes.
Yes,
exactly. And of course, resident at Her Majesty's pleasure as well.
Exactly. And I think it was 56 votes that she got. And big kudos to Nicola Sturgeon for basically just shutting her down yesterday when she was kind of approached by her in terms of their immigration policy and stuff like that, because I think that for me tells us and it goes back to what Kate Monaghan was saying earlier on, that it's the inclusive Scotland that we want to build, it's the inclusive Scotland that we want to develop, all ages, nations, nationalities, sexualities, whatever. It's that inclusiveness. And I think that the Glasgow South, result and that absolute rejection of Jada absolutely showed us that, and it reflects that as well. And I've just noticed that Humza Yousaf has increased his majority over the Labour Party. There was an incident earlier on when he was accosted by a couple of I think it was not the Liberal Democrats, I will say, the Liberal Party, who accosted him, and respect to other parties who came and to his rescue, I think, as well. So there was a couple of right wing incidents so far.
Yes, certainly a little bit of political theatre and stunts from Derek Deek Johnson in the context of confronting confronting Hamza Yusuf, and I think they were eventually removed from the counting centre. And as you say, the result for Glasgow Pollock, which is Hamza Yusuf retaining the seat and increasing his majority over Labour. So that moving forward. But thinking for a moment about the messages and the lessons of the confrontation last night between Jada Franson and the First Minister, which were widely reported on social media, it certainly struck me that it was obvious that the First Minister was, as is almost always the case, travels with very light protection. She had one detective with her, who was not inserting himself into the conversation at all. I'm sure he was clearly doing his job, but the First Minister was out and about, was not travelling in a cavalcade of armoured Range Rovers, as Prime Ministers are wont to do. Whilst Franson, we were talking about political stunts and theatre from Derek Johnson, Jada Franson and her extremist chums thrive on political stunts and confrontations of that sort, which is partially why they end up in jail from time to time. But it was so in the context of Franson wanting to create an event and wanting to create a reaction, and thinking of the physicality of the circumstances as well. Whereas it was the younger of the First Minister's detectives who was with her last night, and he, from my experience, is not a small boy. But still, the Franson, clearly by her body language and her behaviour and the way in which she was addressing the First Minister, it was an attempt to confront, and there was a physicality to that confrontation. And I was struck that the First Minister stood her ground.
Yes.
Having attempted to extract herself from the situation, the First Minister then stood her ground and confronted Jansen and made her points very clear. And of course, the point that the First Minister made, which was that the South End of Glasgow would reject racism and fascism as represented by Franson, has come to pass, as you say, with a handful of votes for the extremists and Franson rejected by Glasgow South. And the voters of Glasgow South, as you would expect. And I suppose in the nature of that sort of performative politics, it probably goes back to the Union of British Fascists in the 30s in terms of attempting to confront mainstream politicians in areas which would otherwise be touch points, or extremists might think could be turned into touch points, which reflects how little they understand Glasgow South and Pollock Shields and Pollock Shaws and those parts of Glasgow. But it certainly struck me as a positive thing that the First Minister was travelling so openly and publicly and as always was interacting with people.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the early scenes when Nicola Sturgeon first took over as First Minister, when she was in the crowds and she was, going to marches and she was just literally walking through the crowds is quite remarkable in its absolute opposition to what Westminster's like. I mean, it's not. Westminster is, what Nicola Sturgeon does is not that massively unusual. Representatives in Norway and some of the Nordic countries, they travel by public transport. They're just kind of normal people that do that job. And I think we need much more of that. None of this kind of, we Westminster, and you can see it physically as well. You can't even get close to the Houses of Parliament now. You can't get close to number 10. There is a real physical as well as ideological separation, I think, between people and Parliament. And I think that, to Nicola Sturgeon's credit, I was quite, considering that, that Jada Franson has a record, a criminal record and so forth as well. I was surprised that maybe they never stepped in, but actually I think that for Nicola Sturgeon, she showed much more power by not having someone stand in, actually. Yep. And I think that was a massively powerful message for all of us.
Yep, I completely agree. Now, I think that some of our friends at Broadcasting Scotland are producing some graphics for us that you and I can comment on, and they may appear in a moment. the graphics will show the summary of results, so we can see especially in the Central Belt here and the west of the Central Belt, a number of the results that we've heard so far this afternoon, along with the candidates' names, and it's actually in the context of the conversation, Siobhan, that you and I were just having. We do need to remember that no matter the political affiliations of the candidates, these are citizens. These are people who have decided that they would like to put their head above the parapet, as it were, who would like to stand up for whatever it is that they believe, and are prepared to become public and to argue for the causes. So again, it's perhaps a reflection that of the strength of the democracy here, that we have such a wide range of people who feel that politics is for them, and that they have a place to be to take part and to have their say.
Oh, yeah, and AIR is about to declare, which is quite an important one.
It absolutely will be. We'll be watching that one very closely, of course, with a number of Conservative seats through Ayrshire widely, but AIR, slightly more urban environment, AIR being AIR having the Conservatives having a majority of only 750 in AIR, means that it's going to be it will have been a very closely contested seat,
one.
and that the result will be something that we all hang on as it starts to appear. But certainly some of the wider aspects of the.
Sorry, we've won. The SNP's won AIR. Sorry. The SNP's just won AIR. It was literally a couple of hundred. There was literally just 100 and odd votes in it, but the SNP's just taken AIR.
We'll see. We'll get the numbers for you in a moment. But that's another aspect of the reality of campaigning, which is that elections come down to individual votes.
Exactly.
It's the pressure to keep going and keep campaigning until you get to the very, very last gasp, because every single vote can count and can make a difference.
And I think that this is where, the D'Hondt system is complicated, and I think that we've kind of begun to realise, especially the regional list complications, but it is a broadly proportionally representative system. Which is, the constituency is first past the post. So, 160 votes, that means the SNP gets that seat. That's what she won by. But the regional list is to counteract that first past the post structure. It's not a perfect system, but it is broadly proportionate to the votes that people get. I've always felt uncomfortable with the idea of gaming the system, because I think that if the Conservatives get 25% of the vote, then they should get 25% of the seats, But it is interesting, because 160 votes can change a seat,
Yes, your point's absolutely right. We're seeing Siobhan Brown with 18,881 votes, and John Scott for the Conservatives with 18,711, so a majority of 170, which is about as tight as it can get.
Yes.
I mean, there have been examples in the past where one of the Fife constituencies came, I think it was 2 votes eventually, but 170 is pretty close.
Yes.
That's showing a swing to the SNP of an increase in the SNP vote of 2%, and a drop in the Labour vote of 3%, and again, so that's a swing to the SNP of just over 1%. So a small swing, but an important swing, and again a reflection that amongst the unionist parties, that it's interesting to see the Labour vote continuing to drop in AIR. Which you would think would have been a Labour stronghold 20 years ago. They're continuing not to perform and continuing not to recover in seats like AIR. It'll be interesting to see Siobhan Scott now in Holyrood when the Scottish Parliament restarts business, and undoubtedly with such a close margin, she'll have to be working very hard to make it plain to all of her constituents that she is now a constituency MSP, and she is working for the benefit of all of them. But
Absolutely.
having got that foothold, that could be an important step for the SNP.
And I,
That's now showing two SNP gains: East Lothian from
yes,
Labour and Ayr from the Conservatives, and no losses by either the SNP, the Lib Dems, or the Greens. So
that
it's
currently allows a little cushion.
absolutely right. I think that if we were to extrapolate, and that I think it's probably too early to do that with any degree of confidence, but if we were to extrapolate that the rest of the seats are declared as they are at the moment with no further changes, that would then bring the SNP to a majority, I think,
Yeah, it would be
in
65.
Holyrood.
Yeah,
So that would be
65.
a not an overwhelming step, but it would be a step. But of course, I'm mindful about thinking about that aspect as well, because of course the conversations that we've seen played out in the mainstream media over the last few days about the requirement for the SNP to obtain an absolute majority in a parliament and a parliamentary system which was designed to prevent an absolute majority, it feels
Yeah.
a little bit. It feels a little bit odd that all of a sudden it's become a thing.
Isn't it? I mean, isn't it? I think it's a testimony, I think, to how well the SNP is doing. I think it's also a testimony to the issues that will remain strong within Scotland and will never go away, and that is the constitutional issue. It doesn't. I was speaking to someone this morning, and that's what we were kind of saying, that regardless of the vote and the voting results, that these issues will never go away. And it consistently holds. And as long as the independence issue still remains on the agenda, the SNP will continue to hold that massive, solid lead ahead, whether that's an overall majority or whether it's not. But to do that within a system that's designed not to do that is really, really politically kind of fascinating. And it's an interesting one, because I'd imagine people looking in on Scotland must be looking with absolute awe. I mean, if you look at the SNP in terms of the European elections, we were one of the very few parties across Europe that held a very, very strong, solid vote. And lots of European countries must be looking at Scotland and going, wow, how on earth did the SNP manage that? And it is a testimony, I think, to how good the SNP actually are in terms of good governance and so forth. But I think it's a bigger testimony to the people of Scotland having unresolved issues, actually, and not quite going away.
Yes, I think that's a fair point. The big question has not yet been answered in a way that means that the population is settled as to that answer, the broad sweep of the
Yeah,
population. And as you say, until that question is answered in a way that the broad bulk of the population are satisfied with, whatever that answer is, I think you're right.
yeah,
The SNP's raison d'etre obviously is going to continue, and so their political performances will continue. I'm noticing in the background as well that coming away from the West Coast, that Cowdenbeath is an SNP hold as well.
good,
The
good.
SNP seats now on the north of the Forth being held on as well. So we're starting to see now that we have across the constituencies that are declared, we have two SNP gains, one Labour loss, one Labour and one Conservative loss, and we have the Lib Dems on three holds. So again,
Yeah,
a gradual building of a picture, I think, which is not yet caused any substantial national surprises, but on the east coast of the country, in East Lothian, and on the west coast of the country in Ayr, there have been seats that have changed hands now, and both have gone in the direction of the SNP.
I mean, the
Uh,
Dundee West result was quite interesting as well, which was Joe Fitzpatrick, and that's one of the areas I was campaigning for. And he 62% of the vote. It was a good turnout for Dundee, 56.5%, I think, as well. But it was also an increase in the vote. So it was a very, very strong performance for Joe Fitzpatrick. The
that's a
vibes
good
were
point.
very good coming from Caird Hall.
That's a good point. Despite where you are, I singularly failed to talk about Dundee West. But we'll see, and we'll come back to it. So here we've got Renfrewshire North and West. The SNP hold for Natalie Dawn. For Stirling, which we hadn't mentioned, we've got Evelyn Tweed with Dean Lockhart for the Conservatives coming second, and an increase in the SNP majority of 6,895. In Strathkelvin, Bearsden, Rona Mackay increasing the majority for the SNP to 11,484, ahead of Andrew Polson for the Conservatives. In adjacent Clydebank and Mulgai, an SNP hold with Marie McNair on a majority of 17,787, ahead of Pam Gossel on 2,116, and Douglas McAllister for the British Labour in Scotland on 4,013. And there's the result from Renfrewshire again. So a relatively consistent picture there. But yes, Siobhan, you were quite rightly talking to me about the result in Dundee West, and it was something that I asked Kate when she was on. So I should really speak to you as well. In terms of the time that you speak, you were talking as well, and helping us understand a little bit of what you were doing in the streets of Yes City during this campaign. What was your impression with regard to the way in which the campaign was unfolding for you in Dundee? Any particular high points or concerns?
Just to clarify as well, I was also campaigning for Graham Day in Angus South, because he's my MSP rather than, it's complicated. But I think I think that for me, the kind of campaign promoted the social justice elements of it. The issues of housing was something that certainly wanted Dundee to be aware about, and so those kind of initiatives, free school meals, those were the kind of things that certainly I was interested in, and I think that was reflected in the Dundee. I also remember as well that Joe Fitzpatrick was the public health minister, and then in Dundee East you've got Shona Robison who was running the oh God, I'm losing it. The Social Justice and Fairness Commission. Sorry, I do apologise. Yeah. So those issues are quite dear to the heart, not only of the MSPs, but actually I think to the people of Dundee as well. Historically there's lots of poverty in Dundee, so that a vision that will kind of take people out of poverty is something that is always going to hold sway. I think Dundee, for me, it was Yes City because historically we always like to take a chance, so there is an element in Dundee that I think it wasn't a surprise it was Yes City. It wasn't a surprise that we had the highest vote, because historically that's kind of what we like to do. We like to take a chance because there's probably an element of, well, we've not got that much to lose, because of historic poverty and so forth. So it's an interesting one. I think that it was those issues of social justice, and I think that, again, the constitutional issue would have certainly come into that. I had a guy, we were speaking to a guy in Douglas, and he was like moaning about the council, actually, and look at this and the speed bumps, and there's no any speed bumps, and he was right enough. There was kind of cars like driving past really fast and stuff, and then so Tom was trying to kind of gently persuade him SNP, and he turned round and he just went, "Oh no, vote an SNP," so there's that element. There's, no, that's no question, kind of thing. So there's and that's what we ended up talking about. Actually, he was talking about his grandkids. He was talking about like decent schooling. He was talking about just good environment for kids to grow up in. And I think that for me, in terms of the national campaign as well as the local Dundee campaign, that has certainly, I think, brought home just what we can begin to do as a society and as a nation, because it's kind of, for me, it was always about kids first. And I think the SNP tapped into that, like these kind of, just making sure that kids do not inherit the negativity that COVID brings with it. So there was hope, I think. Which came up. Yeah.
Well, that's good, and it's useful to. I always think it's very useful to hear what people's own experiences in the campaigns actually are,
Yeah.
because they tend to be unalloyed and unspun by the parties. So your reflections are direct and are useful. Whilst you were speaking there, we had a declaration from the first of the declarations from the Borders, not a seat that was expected to change, and it hasn't, and so Ettrick, Roxburgh, and Roxburgh, Sherwin, Berwick is a Conservative hold for Rachel Hamilton, with a majority of 6,863, beating the SNP candidate Paul Wheelhouse. The result is a solid result for the Conservatives in a seat where, of course, they have a Conservative MP as well. However, there is a moderate swing to the SNP in Ettrick of about 2.2%, I believe. So
Yeah.
some little progress there for Paul Wheelhouse, but not enough to take the seat.
Yeah, but I think it looked like quite a fall for the Conservatives, even though, but they could afford that comfortable fall, given how much they were ahead.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's there are other seats in the Borders country which will be very closely paid attention to,
Yes.
especially in the west as we get to Dumfries and Galloway. The seats for Oliver Mundell, for example, which I think it's fair to say, will have been targeted by the SNP in an attempt, albeit that they were unsuccessful in their targeting of that seat at the general election. That they would continue to campaign in the west of the border country. I suppose, again, attempt to obtain a foothold from which they could land and expand into the borders. Really,
Yeah.
the Conservative heartland, the only Conservative heartland now in any geographical terms in Scotland, of any particular size. So again, moderate, small changes in voting patterns, but nothing that is indicating a significant or a substantial swing or change in approach across the wider country at the moment. I think, which is helpful. So we'll see the impact of the result from Ayr. I think will be interesting to see how the Conservative Party respond to that. The Ayr and Ayrshire being very much a Conservative redoubt during both in Westminster terms and Holyrood terms, and it looks like the SNP are making a little bit of progress there.
Looks like
so
it, yeah.
Yes, and so we'll see what comes out from them. So in terms also of the implications in Dundee that you were aware of, did you feel that there was any impact of Brexit in the way in which people were voting in people you were speaking to on the streets in Dundee, in the way in which they were behaving?
I think there was an element of, it was an undercurrent, but not there. I think, and I don't mean that in a kind of, it's not part of the issue. I just think it's so deeply embedded now as part of the issues, that it sometimes doesn't even need raising. Does that make sense? There was an element, I think, whereas, it was a wee bit like, it was just another chink for people in Dundee as to why we didn't want the union or why we want change. And I think that, Dundee is very much kind of part of that. And I think that often comes out.
That's an interesting point that you make. I think in other constituencies, I think perhaps Brexit, where Kate was talking about the impact, obviously, on agriculture and fishing from Brexit. I think in some constituencies, especially Edinburgh Central and Edinburgh Southern, the disappearance of academics from Europe and students from Europe, I think, will have an impact. I think the number of voters registered in Edinburgh Central who are not Scottish citizens, something like 8,000 voters. So it's that's a number which would be material. in most constituencies in Scotland. So, inevitably, the Brexit will have different impacts in different parts of the country. I suppose I'm thinking also of the of Nanilan and Yar, where the SNP held, and of course the impact again on agriculture and fishing of Brexit will have been pretty significant there. So that will make a difference. Do you think it's the case, perhaps coming back to the national picture? Do you think that these small or relatively small incremental increases in support for the SNP is perhaps beginning to indicate that they might pick up some marginal seats and see their performance improve in this election in comparison to 2016?
I am wondering. It's hard to say at this moment in time, isn't it? And I was just thinking there, we've gained a couple, so that probably means on the regional, then we're lost there. But it's a complex process. But yes, hopefully. I mean, we've only really got one regional result, which is the Aberdeen Dawn side, so we can't extrapolate much from that. But that was a pretty solid result. If you look at that in comparison to how it was nationally in terms of expected in terms of the polling and how it was expected, that was much higher than what we would have expected. I think if we can increase that, if the SNP can increase that in the regional list in comparison to what the polls were expecting, then we probably could pick up a few, which would be good. It really depends. I mean, it really depends on a lot. But the thing is, this is the thing about the regional list, isn't it? This is where the Westminster elections are probably much more exciting, in the sense that the SNP is going to win, because it's just first past the post and is winner takes all. But the regional list, there's so many different complex factors moving in. I mean, in some areas the Labour Party are increasing their vote. Now that changes the whole dynamic. It looks like the Greens might increase their votes across the regional list, so that's going to change things as well. We don't know what effect the Alba impact will have.
Yep. Absolutely. Thanks, Siobhan. Now we're joined by another guest who's been kind enough to come and join us on Broadcasting Scotland, and I think Linda Fabiani, who was an MSP up until at the end of the last Parliament, is joining us from Lanarkshire. Linda, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good,
not
good.
as tired as I would normally be at account time, but yeah, fine.
Yes, it's a good point that you make. I know certainly a number of candidates were saying, who've stood before, were saying during the day yesterday, oh well, I'd better stop campaigning at 8 o'clock because there'll be a long night. And campaign managers were saying, no, you'll be campaigning until 10 o'clock tonight because you're going to get to your bed. So we need you bright and bushy-tailed in the morning. So a different election in all sorts of ways. So Linda, we've seen more than 20 constituency seats declared so far this afternoon. What do you have any reflections or any views as to any trends that you think we're seeing so far today?
Gosh, well, I suppose that the main thing for me is it's very, very clear that the SNP vote is holding up, doing well in particular seats. Which is grand, and I'm pleased about that. But there was all this talk about we shouldn't be talking about the Constitution and all that kind of thing. Well, I think the results have shown quite clearly that people are very, very interested in the Constitution, to call it that, and that the wish for a democratic referendum is very clear in the SNP vote. So yeah, it's good.
That's good, thank you. And thinking in particular of the two seats that have changed hands, Paul McLennan winning for the SNP in East Lothian and Siobhan winning for the SNP in Ayr. Any particular thoughts about either of those elections?
I'm absolutely delighted about those. Really, really pleased. I mean, the East Lothian one's an interesting one because I was in the Parliament in first session 1999 to 2003 along with Ian Gray. And of course, then Ian Gray lost it to David McCletchie in 2003 and was out of the Parliament for a while. Then it went back Labour again, and now it's SNP. So that's an absolutely smashing result. for Paul. I'm delighted for him, and I'm delighted for all the SNP activists in East Lothian who have stuck with the SNP all the way through, and always fought the struggle for the SNP. Ayr, my goodness, that's another one with a history. I was down in the 2001 by-election when Jim Mather stood for Ayr. And gosh, it's hard to imagine. That's 20 years ago. My goodness. And that was the point where John spoke women, of course, and has held it ever since. So, you know,
Yes,
in a way,
yes.
I've got a certain sympathy for John. John's, what would I say, a very particular kind of conservative. I've always known him as a caring man who wants the best, and a decent guy. So he'll be absolutely gutted. I know he will be. It's hard. It must be really hard to hold on to a seat for all that time and then to lose it in such a close margin as well. But I've heard really, really good things about who's going to be our new MSP. So I'm delighted. And it's interesting, that's 2 seats in the south of Scotland.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, one other result that's just been declared, albeit not in the south of Scotland, but one that's of interest, I think, to especially those who are watching the transition. It's something we've been touching on a little bit earlier, Linda. The transition now with a cohort of exceedingly experienced and exceedingly important MSPs standing down and retiring at this election, of whom you are one. We're seeing that the Argyll and Bute result. Jenny Minto elected with 16,608 seats, a majority of 8,963, which Mike Russell has just admitted is a larger majority than he had when he was first elected to the constituency, which is very generous of him. So it's an SNP hold. However, as we know, the nature of campaigning in a constituency like Argyll and Bute is very different to the nature of campaigning in Dundee, where Siobhan is, or Edinburgh, where I am. And I certainly am aware that the efforts and the hard work that's involved in visiting as many communities spread across Argyll and Bute and campaigning effectively. Obviously, the SNP have a very successful and effective branch on Isla and Jura that I'm aware of. But any reflection on Jenny Jenny Minto enjoying such a success in Argyll and Bute?
I think that's absolutely super. I used to live on Bute, in fact, so I know the constituency generally of Argyll and Bute, and yeah, you're right. That I know that Mike was often absolutely exhausted. Not just campaigning in Argyll and Bute, but the duties of a constituency MSP in an area with all these islands and all these different communities, it's hard work. But that's a mark of the dedication of Michael Russell, and we all know that. And I don't know Jenny personally, but I know that Michael just rated her so highly. Again, she's someone that I think will be absolutely great when they get into the Parliament. And it's that passion for your area. You know, if you stand for the SNP, you've got an absolute passion for independence, and that's can just never be denied, and everyone knows that. But you've also got a passion for your area, because I think anyone that stands of any party for a constituency should seriously stands for a constituency should have a passion for their area and really care about it. And from what I've heard from Michael Russell, Jenny fits that. So, and she's a good bit younger than him, so she'll be able. It's like my hoped for successor, Nice O'Brien, a good bit younger, so they'll have all that energy and all that drive, and it's great.
No, that's an interesting point. Now, I'm mindful as well that I've got the pleasure and the privilege of talking in this programme with two very experienced female politicians, and the point you were making, Linda, there with regard to the challenges of representing a wide geographical area, and the challenges that an MSP such as Jenny might well face now in terms of both the time and effort that's required to cover constituency work, let alone be shuttling back and forth to Edinburgh or wherever else the Parliament's sitting in the summer.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is scope for further reform in the way in which the Scottish Parliament operates in order to make sure that it is even more accommodating and appropriate for people who have family responsibilities or who live don't live in the central belt?
I've got real mixed feelings about this, Andrew. You know, I've thought about it quite a bit, and of course, with everything that's happened in the last year or so, these things have to be thought about more. I would hope that nobody rushes into anything, because too often people look at things and say, "Oh, we have to change; it's possible," and change happens, and it hasn't been thought through with all the implications taken in. So, I have quite mixed views. I do think there's space for generally a bit more of the online stuff that everybody's been doing. I think there are situations where that's appropriate. But I also think that for a parliament in particular, there's something very basic about people coming together in a public space and having debate. So I'm not convinced that it's as easy as saying, "Oh, we can change it now, we have shown that we can change it." So it might be that there's certain committees and things like that that can be done online. It might be that there can be occasional plenaries that are done online, but I do think the coming together is very, very important. There's also an issue about all the discussion about making it easier for childcare and things like that. Yes, I get all that. But far too often that debate comes round to talking about allowing women to be the ones that take part more because of childcare and other duties. And I have a bit of a concern that we get into that situation where it becomes women still have all the responsibilities of the family because they can now sit in a computer. You know, in any family, all these family members have a responsibility. And these things have to be thought through before someone gets elected. And everyone knows what the duties are, or should know. They shouldn't be standing if they haven't looked into what the duties are. So you have to get these things sorted out. So I think there's space for a bit of a hybrid model in some ways. But let's not pretend that women's lives would automatically be made easier if they could do their job on a computer instead of travelling. Because I don't actually hear anybody saying that men's lives would be made easier by that. So, yeah.
And that's precisely why I was asking you rather than asking you for your opinion. And Siobhan, what's your reflection on the challenges, or what perhaps our parliamentary system should consider in terms of evolution, continued evolution, in order to be as inclusive a parliament as possible?
I mean, to a certain extent, I agree with what Linda was saying, that I think there's scope in some areas, but in other areas there is less scope. And I think if you watch even just the online leadership debates, when one person is on the screen and the others in the studio, then it puts them at a disadvantage, I think, in terms of interacting with the debate. So there is an element there. In order to get the best from your MSP, perhaps you need that kind of face-to-face. Having said that, for some reasons there could be there could be adjustments made in those respects. I think that there's more scope, like you were saying, Linda, for committees and so forth as well. I think that's much more, because it's not debate, it's more kind of discussion, information based, getting through paperwork and so forth. So I think there's more scope there. But for me, and I wasn't really thinking about it in a gendered way, I was thinking about it more, if you spend less time in Edinburgh, then you can spend more time, like thinking about Argyll and Bute, with your constituents. So there's maybe just a thinking about a rebalance of that as well. Edinburgh's not that far, but it's far enough if you're in the island, so it does take a big chunk of your time. I was speaking to Chris Law the other day. We were out leafleting in just my local village, and he was saying that part of his role is international development in Westminster, and the stuff that he's managed to do online has allowed much more scope in that respect as well. He says, you're travelling, he sounds dead grandiose, he says, but it's just exhausting and you're trying to be there. So it can help in those issues as well. So there is lots of scope there. But I agree with Linda, I think that society has a tendency to kind of have this bit of a pendulum swing, that we react to events rather than thinking things through a bit more. So is maybe just thinking about, well, what it was the benefit, what was not, as opposed to, which is kind of what we tend to do, is that kind of like, oh, let's make everything online. You know, it's that kind of extreme pendulum. So it is time to just, I actually think, just almost like just equality impact assess these issues in terms of what
Yes.
would be beneficial. Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. I think that's a really good way of putting it. Because the other thing is that people aren't recognising is, and this is going to sound quite flippant, but there is a serious side to this. You can't get out of meetings now, you know, because you can't say, "Oh, I'm going to another meeting." And they'll say, "Well, we'll just change the time. I'll send you a different link," and you're like, "Oh gosh." Because you can't actually say, "Oh, well, you know, I'll never get from A to B in that time." You know what the traffic's like. So, in actual fact, you get to a stage where you're packing your diary with Zoom meetings and things, and so often it is very convenient, as Chris was talking about. But there's other times where you end up with an awful lot more work. I mean, I certainly, I think have spent daytime, because I'm missing the evening meetings where you'd be out and about in the constituency and stuff, but daytime meetings, they're back to back almost, you know, and I think that creates its own pressures as well. So Siobhan's absolutely right. You have to think it through properly, not just react.
Well, that's a good point. Now, one other aspect that's not directly connected to, but it's something that you and I, Linda, have spoken about before, but it came up again on the streets when I was out yesterday, the day before yesterday. A campaigner of several decades' commitment to the SNP. I bumped into him in Edinburgh on Wednesday, during Wednesday. And we were talking about what had changed, and that's something that Siobhan and I have talked about and others have on this programme. But we were talking about what he was reflecting on what he'd seen change over a number of campaigns. And the thing that had struck him the most, and he was distributing get out the vote cards, so these are cards that have names and addresses on them. He was struck by what he regarded as the significant growth in the number of women who were being identified as supporters of the SNP and or supporters of independence. Now, you and I spoke more than a year ago about the changing demographics in the support for marches for independence, and of course we had polling over the summer in 2020 that indicated that there was a definite growth in the number of women supporting independence, and so this friend and a colleague of many years campaigning experience, he picking that up as well, it took me right back to the conversation that we had before. So, Linda, in terms of the senses, your sense of what the campaign has been, your sense of the way in which perhaps the issues which are cutting through, are you seeing more of a reflection of things which might be considered to be of greater importance to women, or that women are engaging more in the dispute, in the debates that are taking place?
What I would say is I haven't noticed particularly more of an interest in women's issues as they come. But I think a lot of that's because it's become the norm now. You know, even apart from Nicola and, you know, the SNP being in government and the things we have done, I think since the Parliament came into being, even under the previous administrations, there has been more of a fairness in policies and things that have been taken through, and more of a care given to how all these things do affect women and children and the family and all of that. So I think it's become much more mainstream. I'm certainly seeing a lot more women, as we have discussed before, Andrew, being interested in politics. And that's where I think Nicola Sturgeon has had a big impact. You know, not just on a personal level, but also about making sure the cabinet's gender balanced, the government's gender balanced, and all of that. Because I think even if people don't think about it, there's just a recognition that the most important person in the country and the most credible leader across the UK is a woman. And I think that has gone an awful, awful long way. And I'm certainly finding both on the doors and on social media, which I have very mixed feelings about, I have to say. But on a lot of my social media, I'm interacting with women on a political basis much more, I would say, in the last few years than I had ever known before. Very opinionated women as well. My goodness, there's a downside to it too. You know, I actually think it's harder to have the political fight with another member of the sisterhood than it is with some big guy that you can just because they don't. It's no easy. So I think it's great, you know. So and it's certainly a fact. Young women too. Young women too.
That's a very good point, and I suspect we'll see. I mean, and I apologise for sounding a bit Edinburgh centric. It's just because I'm in Edinburgh, but we will see two key seats declared today. We expect Edinburgh Western, where Sarah Masson is standing for the SNP. Who's a young female candidate, and Edinburgh Southern, where Katrina MacDonald, similarly a young female candidate, both very strong campaigners, both who've run very good campaigns. Sarah, I think, making a tremendous virtue of being the antithesis, if that's possible, of the current MSP. And I know that on each occasion that he has sworn or been aggressive or has conducted himself in a manner that you wouldn't expect, that she has made it her business to do precisely the opposite, and to be more inclusive and more considered and more considerate than he is. And Katrina MacDonald in Edinburgh Southern, who has run a multilingual campaign, has run a very online campaign with help from Michael Gray at Scotia and others, has engaged across a very broad constituency. It's the constituency I grew up in, so I understand it a wee bit.
Right.
So we're seeing young women standing for the SNP in difficult seats and making a great impact with their campaigns. Siobhan, I was just wondering, in a similar vein, is your experience in this campaign that you've found more engagement from female voters or more arguments from female voters about issues?
Not more arguments. No, certainly not more arguments. I think that across the board, women are kind of becoming just a bit more open to the ideas of independence and the ideas of the SNP and so forth as well. But no, certainly not arguments as such. But then again, didn't really come across massively enthusiastic proponents of the SNP when I was campaigning either. So in that respect, I've got not that much to go on, apart from what I saw in the polls, which is kind of looking relatively close. The female support for the SNP was actually pretty high. I think one poll put it something like 59%, so it has been quite high. And I do think it comes back to a bit like what Linda was saying, that there is an element of women are being much more open, much more politically articulate. I remember back in just after the referendum, and I think it might have been Maggie Chapman, and I remember turning around saying, it's going to be women that win this. I think it has to be women that win this. And I think there was an element of the cooperation, I think, that was maybe required. And I think that if you go back to the Nicola Sturgeon effect, and there's one thing that I think Nicola Sturgeon has done, and I think she's been clear that almost she's doing it as a woman, and that is the consensus building that she's often done. And it's created a very, very different atmosphere from Westminster, which is very male dominated as well. So there's that kind of new type of politics, and you see that in New Zealand, you see it in Iceland as well, that might not necessarily be feminine in nature, but it's been spearheaded by women, so becomes de facto feminine, if that makes sense. Or it certainly gives that impression that it's a female-based politics. And I think it is that kind of collaboration, cooperation, consensus building that Nicola Sturgeon has got, that I think that's maybe appealed to women a bit more. Linda, you were saying, I can't remember what it was exactly you were saying, but it reminded me of a project that me and a few friends did as Imagine Scotland, and we worked with the Dundee International Women's Centre looking at just trying to engage women politically, women who were new to Scotland or lived in Scotland for 20 odd years or whatever. And we asked the question, would you become involved in politics? Oh my God, never, never, never. But almost all of them said to some degree, I would like to get involved in my community. So where is the distinction? And there's that kind of stereotype, maybe actually not even a stereotype because it tends to be based on reality, but there's that image of politics as cutthroat, hard, harsh, very Westminster type, actually, political, political badgering, loggerheads, constant kind of partisan style politics. But when you actually began to dig a little bit deeper as to what the women were meaning in terms of working for the community, it's like, well, that is politics. It's politics at its most basic level, and I think that Nicola Sturgeon has maybe reset that a wee bit and made politics just that bit more community based, a bit more collaborative based, and I think that is maybe becoming the appeal for women.
That's a very good point, Siobhan. Thank you. One other aspect, moving on a little bit in terms of the discussion, and I think it's apparent that this may be a shift change or a tea break for returning officers because we've not had any declarations for the last little while. So we've maybe got the opportunity, although certainly I'm hearing suggestions that Edinburgh Central and Edinburgh Western are not far away. But thinking a little bit, because we've got the benefit of Linda with us at the moment, and Linda having had at least a few days, having finished your career in your current career in Holyrood, I won't say any more than that. I was going to ask you to reflect perhaps on what you thought were either the strengths of our Holyrood Parliament and the way in which it operates and it reflects and it meets the expectations of voters in Scotland, or perhaps alternatively aspects that you think that we should look at for reform.
Oh gosh. Well, of course, every new Parliament you get a new presiding officer, and every new presiding officer wants to have a legacy and leave their mark. So I'm in no doubt whatsoever that whoever is the new presiding officer will set up some sort of commission or something, and there'll be lots of discussion. But that's the way it should be. Things should not be left static and just to roll on. I'd made up my mind, Andrew, that I'm not going to be the kind of former politician who watches everything that happens and lets everybody know where I think they've gone wrong. I'm not going to be angry from Straven or anything like that. However, I had an experience towards the end of my political career there on a committee, chairing the committee into the government's handling of harassment complaints. It was not a pleasant experience.
I'm joking. Sorry.
I'm hoping that not that long from now, people will genuinely have forgotten it. But it was quite an experience. What it did make very plain to me, even aside from all the content of it and everything else, what it brought home to me was that there are things about the Parliament that do need looked at again because a lot has changed, and also that public expectations of behaviours are such that we really should be looking at it again. And I did mention social media earlier, thing that I have mixed feelings about. So all of that came into it. Things like, for example, there was a lot of leaking from that committee, and the reality is that under the MSP's Code of Conduct, there has to be a report about somebody having done something wrong, an investigation and everything else. And it is up to the individual MSP as to their own behaviour. That was one aspect of it. The convener of the committee has no control over any of that at all. Public expectation was that I should have. I mean, would have lost count of the number of emails and letters I got saying, you're an absolutely rubbish convener because you're letting them away with murder and you should be doing this and doing that. And I thought, oh, if only a dictatorship was in order in my committee, I could do these things very well. But so there was an expectation of behaviour there that was not being met by the public, not being met by the committee in regard to what the public thought it should be. There was another aspect of it, which was social media. Some of it was absolutely vile. But you also had committee members posting stuff on social media. So again, that's a behaviour I didn't believe to be acceptable, but not covered anywhere in Code of Conduct because we've sort of got a bit behind with that kind of thing. There was another aspect of it that I found problematic, which was you've got a committee ongoing looking into something very serious and taking it very seriously. Meanwhile, you're going to First Minister's questions. And the stuff that you're discussing at the committee or about to discuss at the committee was getting raised at First Minister's questions in the Parliament. I don't believe that to be acceptable. I'm not saying it should be stymied altogether or that people can't ask what they want, but the politicking of it, the raw politicking of it, I found problematic when I'm trying to lead a very, very serious inquiry. So, after all that rambling on, what I'm saying is, one thing I will do is write to the new presiding officer and chief exec to say, here's an aspect of parliamentary business that I really think you have to look very carefully at. Now, I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I think it has to be considered. And it's about behaviour of those who are charged to do a duty. And I think they should have respect for the subject. I think they should have respect for the Parliament and respect for the public. And there should be a level of expectation of what that behaviour should be. And I think we have to tackle the social media aspect. We certainly can't police what people put in social media outside. And there's a bunch, let's face it, there's a bunch of nutters there that just put some horrible, vile stuff, usually under anonymous identities. We have to deal with that. But when it's people directly involved, I think there should be a discipline applied by them personally and by their party and by the Parliament. So there you go. So that's the only thing I will interfere in, and then I will say, here's my contribution, over to you guys.
Carry on.
And let's see how it goes.
You were using language that I was just about to ask you about there, Linda, towards the end of your very helpful and very detailed and very relevant comments. And it was the point about respect in terms of respecting other parliamentarians, respecting the Parliament, respecting the people, respecting the subjects who had been those who had made complaints and so were central to the prosecutions and to the HR processes, and so a wide. So do you think perhaps that and social media, or the greater misuse of social media might be a symptom of this? Do you think that respect has reduced over the period of the last Parliament?
Yes, something I hear bandied about quite a lot, and I've heard it in the Parliament over the years, and I've heard other people say it, and I've always had a problem with it, is that you have to earn respect, Okay, I don't actually buy that. I think you have to respect somebody until they do something to lose it. I think you start off with respecting somebody because that's the polite and the decent thing to do. And I think you should respect your institution as well. And I think you should respect the people who have given you a very, very privileged position by electing you into your Parliament. And for me, that respect is about a certain level of behaviour. I would even go a wee bit further. I think you should respect positions. I mean, I remember years ago being at a thing in, I think it was somewhere in Spain. It was something I was at. And Jack McConnell, who was First Minister at the time, who was not my party or anything, came into this event, and he was very much disrespected by the audience. And I remember being incandescent with rage at the way Jack was treated. And it's not because I had a particular passion for Jack McConnell or anything, but I was really annoyed that the position of First Minister in my country was being disrespected. Because he'd actually, much as I didn't agree with him politically, he'd never ever done anything that made me get a great deal of respect for him. And one of the things that I think has been really difficult over the last while has been the lack of respect that is shown to our First Minister. And I find that difficult to deal with, because I don't actually believe she's done anything to lose that respect. In fact, all these inquiries that have shown quite clearly that she hasn't. But when you consider that she came to that committee and she spent 8 hours being grilled, and some of the ways that she was spoken to was absolutely appalling. For me, it was quite difficult because I had to make that judgment as convener. Do I let these people show themselves up for what they're doing here? Or do I stop it and get accused of shutting down debate? And does Nicola then, by all the pile on social media, get accused of using her wee pal Fabiani to make sure she didn't ask difficult questions? So there was a lot of judgments that had to be done. But not just in the committee, but in the Parliament as well. She was treated with such a lack of respect, and that's the First Minister of our country, regardless of political allegiance, who hasn't done anything offensive to lose that respect. So, yeah, I find that whole attitude very difficult. It's perhaps a frustration by those who are feeling within the Parliament disenfranchised because they lost what they seen as their rightful positions and all that stuff. But I think it's a problem.
Yep.
Linda, can I just maybe come in here? Just because, I mean, I thought you were really good, to be honest. What struck me looking at it was the distinct lack of professionalism that some people seem to just
I can't hear you.
exhibit. And just thinking that, some of the things that happen, the leaking on social media, the actual manipulation of information, the lies that were actually peddled as well, and some of them were quite blatant. And I just kept thinking to myself, I would never get away with that in the job that I do. I would never get away with that in the job that I do. There is a minimum criteria of professionalism that we need to, and I've got, it's not like I'm in a big highfalutin job, anything like that, but there is a minimum standards of professionalism I think that everybody needs to have. And what struck me to the point where I was actually excruciatingly embarrassed sometimes was the childishness and that distinct lack of professionalism, and that includes the lack of respect. It includes the manipulation of information, actually, to create a narrative that kind of came forward, and it shamed the Scottish Parliament to a certain extent. And by the end of it, I kept thinking, oh my God, there's going to have to be an inquiry into the inquiry. Because it was so mad. But it was. And one of the things I've been thinking about over the course of this, and I think it does connect, is I think the SNP do vetting pretty well, but, I'm not going to say no. I know people standing for being MSP, and there was no vetting. There was nothing. It was literally a phone call, and you think, oh my God, you've got people who work as carers on minimum wage that have to go through things like the disclosure form, and there's standards and rules that people have to go through in order to get a job. But then an MSP can get a job like that just by pure luck. So there has to be some kind of, even before you get to Parliament, to me, there has to be some kind of minimum standards that's expected. I think that the main political parties do that better, but for the smaller ones, it's shameful.
Well, I don't know. I mean, most of the embarrassing things I've seen in Parliament are from members from mainstream parties,
Well, that's true. That's true, right enough. Yeah, it doesn't always be. Yeah.
I don't know. That's a difficult subject. I mean, if you think that Parliament should be representative of the people generally, you need people from all sorts of walks of life, and I would be a wee bit worried about putting any particular standards on the ability to stand for Parliament. So I think it's up to the parties to make sure that their candidates. No?
Yeah, I understand that. The thought,
absolutely.
Yeah.
What we can maybe do, and sorry, and that was, thank you both. That was a very important and a very enlightening and a very useful conversation and discussion. Thank you. What I will do is we'll cut back where the broadcasters aren't covering it very much, but I can see that Edinburgh Western has declared. So a big increase in the turnout from 39,000 at the last Scottish election to 46,000 or more this time around. And I think what's pretty clear evidence of the clearest evidence I've seen so far today of tactical voting. Alex Cole-Hamilton has been returned as the MSP with 25,578 votes, 54% of the 54% of the vote. The SNP candidate Sarah Masson with 15,693 votes, which is just over almost exactly a third of the vote. Now that then means that both the Conservative and Labour candidates have dropped to just about 2,500 votes each, which again they were from my recollection, the Conservative vote was just under 6,000 the last time, and the Labour vote was just under 4,000, just over 4,000 last time. So it's the trend of tactical voting in Edinburgh Western appears to be continuing, and Mr. Cole-Hamilton appears to be the grateful recipient of people lending their votes to him. So any views on the result that we're hearing from Edinburgh Western? First of all, Linda.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, well done, Sarah. I followed Sarah's campaign closely because I thought she was a brilliant candidate and she's somebody I rate very highly. But I'll tell you what, I'm having a wee sort of wry smile to myself because, we heard Anna Sarwar all the way through the campaign saying, people are fed up talking. People are not interested in the Constitution, and and we hear Willie Rennie says it quite often as well. And I don't know what Douglas Ross says because it just goes, my ears just shut whenever I hear the name. But do you know something? That's great. This being retired, you can say what you like. But you get all that. It's not about the Constitution. People are fed up listening about the Constitution. But as you said yourself there, Andrew, there appears to be tactical voting on the unionist side there, and we've got a very clear unionist vote and independentista vote there. So people are interested in the Constitution. That's what's driving them. Let's not pretend otherwise. So that would be my comment there.
That's a very good observation, Linda. Thank you. Siobhan, what any comment from you on that result from Edinburgh Western?
Well, it shows you that tactical voting works, doesn't it? Which is kind of, if only we can be so united, maybe. But yes, I mean, it's. I think that I'm hearing that it's not worked for Edinburgh Central because I'm hearing rumours that the Tories have conceded. But we should get that result quite soon. So that would be good. So maybe Edinburgh Western seems to be the extreme example of the tactical voting that seems to be occurring. It's happening in small place, but here that's quite. I mean, give them the due. That's quite a victory, actually. That's quite a coordinated, kind of and quite single-minded. Like you said, Linda, kind of single-minded in terms of its strategy, and it's clearly worked quite well. It's to our benefit, I think, that maybe it's not been quite as successful across the other board. What is interesting, and I'm just looking at this, I've moved on to STV now, so that in terms of the constituency seats, the SNP are the only party to have gained. Everybody else has lost across the board. So that's quite interesting. Yes. I think it's like the Conservatives has lost 0.9, and it's not much. SNP's not gained much, 1.1%, but it's the only party to have gained any in terms of so far across the board. So that's an interesting one as well.
I think that's absolutely right.
Was needed.
I think that's absolutely right, Siobhan. Whilst we've been talking, I can see that the SNP have held Greenock and Inverclyde with Stuart McMillan re-elected. The SNP have held Murray with Richard Lochhead re-elected, and so I'm taking these from Ballot Box Scotland at the moment. And there was also shortly before Edinburgh Western declared, SNP had also held Skyla Chaber and Badenoch with Kate Forbes re-elected. So my point in mentioning those, Siobhan, is that the point you're making is continuing to hold out in the results that I'm seeing here, insofar as we're seeing the SNP continuing to hold seats and small incremental gains in marginal seats. Linda, does any particular comments on either on Kate Forbes, Richard Lochhead, Stuart McMillan being returned to Holyrood?
Well, Stuart and Richard are long-term pals. Kate's still too young to be a long-term pal, but that young woman has astounded me since she came into Parliament in 2016, and I'm just in awe of her, I have to say. To have ended up in the cabinet in the style that she did, her ability to grasp policy and deal with things, it's not just that though, it's even the way she is able to deal with the political jibes and the hard times she's had, standing on that front bench, going through everything that we've all been through in the last year, coped with it admirably. And as well as all of that, she's such a delightful young woman, a wonderful personality, lovely manner, just everything. She is just tremendous, and she believes she's just going to go from strength to strength with all that talent, and we are so fortunate to have her there. I'd love to say the same about Stuart and Richard, but they're fabulous as well, and I've known them for so long, and they have worked so very, very hard. And I remember way back, when Richard stood in the by-election after we lost Margaret Ewing and took Murray, and he's worked tirelessly since. And Stuart, when you think what Stuart did to gain Inverclyde the way he did, and he's just increased it. He's wonderful. Kate, the only person that I think of when I think of Kate, and who does Kate remind you of, is Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola was 27 when she got elected in 1999. And I knew her before that, but I also shared an office with her. And whilst I never foresaw the heights to which she would reach, because she really is exceptional, I always knew that she was going places because she had that focus and passion and single-mindedness. And Kate's got that. She's got it in spades, so it's great.
Yeah. One other point you were making there with regard to long-term political friends and associates from a length of time in the Parliament. One result we've not touched on was Perthshire North and the return of John Swinney, who is now, I think, the longest-serving MSP in Parliament. And maybe two stories in that election. Firstly, that John Swinney is returned, and as I say, is now the longest-serving MSP, and also that, of course, Murdo Fraser was standing as the Conservative candidate in the constituency in Perthshire North, and came second. Do you thinking about our political system, not necessarily thinking about Mr. Fraser, but thinking about our political system more generally? I think that's now 8 times that he has failed in a constituency-based election. Do you think that there are arguments, or that we should consider some way of managing those who are never directly elected to Parliament but who sit in Parliament for a very long time? I'll ask Linda first of all.
Well, I don't know. You actually said, he has failed so many times. I don't know if it's terminology I would use, because the way the Parliament's set up, it's supposed to be, again, representative of the electorate, and representative of the votes that come in. And I would never forget the fact that I myself and so many of my colleagues started out on the lists. In 1999 and 2003, it was the lists for the SNP. And it was the same
Absolutely.
in 2007. And you know what was interesting? The Labour Party used to refer to those of us on the list as the assisted place MSPs. And it really hurt because we were working our butts off, you know. And when you actually look at the way the Parliament was set up, each MSP was supposed to be equal, and it actually said each MSP was equal. And then one of the first things that was done by the Labour and Lib Dem coalition was to recast the expenses and regional office stuff from the Scotland Act and change it all so that it did make the list MSPs a sort of lesser in terms of resources and what you were able to do. And you could look at it now and say the tables have turned, you know, and now it's mostly the SNP, our constituency. I know that Plaid Cymru, for example, in the Welsh Senate, I don't know if they still do, but there was a time when they didn't allow the same people to stand in constituencies and stand in the list. So again, I would say if you're working in this system, it's down to the parties to decide how they operate that system for them, you know, for them. So if the system is kept as it is, it's up to them to decide how they deal with their constituencies and their list places. If you're going to change the system, my own view is that if you're going to remain truly representative and change the system, then you're looking at a proportional representation system rather than the hybrid that's the additional member system. So I think there's pros and cons in all of it. There was a commission back in 2003, 2004. Michael Russell sat on it actually, a commission looking at the voting system, and they recommended that the Parliament move to a fully proportional system, but it was never ever implemented. So perhaps it is time to look at it again. But you're never going to get the perfect system, are you? You just never are. So
I think there's an argument, so long as the system does represent the views of the population, and the modified D'Hondt that we have at the moment is one way of doing that, then yes, so long as there's representation, then it shouldn't be criticised simply because it's not the result that you want. Yeah. I was thinking more about this, and I completely get the point that you, as the SNP generally, the First Minister, yourself, started out political careers in Holyrood on the list, and so it's obviously an important aspect. It's an important balancing component in making sure that our Parliament is representative. It was more the point of those who then become career politicians as a result of their party allegiance rather than as a result of their appeal to the electorate. But as you say, the point is that the Parliament has to be representative. Siobhan, you've been listening to me whittling on, and Linda giving her very thoughtful and reflective. I was
whittling too, Andrew.
No, not at all. Siobhan, what's your reflection on the way in which the D'Hondt system and the list system allows for the reflection of the views of the population as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I was saying that earlier on, Linda, before you came in, that, for all the faults that the D'Hondt system has, it is broadly representative. The SNP are sitting on about 48% of the vote. They're likely to get 40. You know what I mean? So that's it's kind of, for me, it's good. It's a complicated system, but I do think that it has to be proportionate. And we might not like some of the parties that are there, but you know what? That's just life. That's, if people vote for them, then they do it. It's interesting what you were saying, Linda, because I didn't know that about the list, and I suppose the increasing demeaning of the list seats that seems to be happening, the hierarchisation of it. But that's an interesting one. I didn't know that. But there is a kind of certain snobbery, isn't there, about the list seat now? That's probably unfair because people work just as hard no matter what. And in ways you can argue that the list might be slightly harder because you might be less known to your constituents and so forth. But yeah, so it's an interesting one. But yeah, we definitely need I think, post-independence, it would be good to review the system to make it just more simply representative rather than this half and half, because I do think it's overly complex for what it's trying to do. It sounded to me when it was getting made, it was just this, they couldn't quite move away from the Westminster system, but tried to do something just a bit more progressive. But I think it definitely could be do with a long-term change. But it is broadly representative, and I think that, I know that there's a lot of criticism of the D'Hondt system, but, that's my point I always come back to. But you kind of broadly get what you vote for. And isn't that what democracy is about?
Absolutely. No, a point very well made, indeed. Thank you, Siobhan. We're not seeing any more constituencies declaring at the moment. Maybe different regions.
Fergus Ewan has retained, but I don't know by how much. Yeah.
So we're maybe seeing different returning officers in different parts of the country take their tea at different times, which is maybe why we're getting a patchy appearance of these results coming through. But if Fergus Ewing has been returned, we will try and identify that quickly and see where we are. But your point, Siobhan, is absolutely right. We're seeing the SNP with a constituency share of 48% at the moment, and so that then reflects in the number of MSPs. Then that seems that feels and sounds like a representative approach and a representative way to do things. It would have some degree of weight or authority attached to it if that's the way in which it plays out. And it is important, I think, thinking about the independence campaign for a moment, the consistent refusal perhaps by Westminster to admit the democratic wishes of people, or to deny, or more importantly, to deny the democratic wishes of people, ultimately leads you, as the risk of leading you to a not very happy place. If people feel that they don't have a democratic voice, then that can lead to people trying to find a voice in other ways, which would not be welcome in a mature democracy. So the hard fact is, and the important fact is, that in any representative democracy, different parts of our society will have a voice, and that's important. I think, Siobhan, does that resonate with you as a long-term SNP campaigner?
Can I be really honest and say I got slightly distracted because the regional result for Dundee West came in?
Well, let's talk about the results. Come on.
Fatma's just thinking that SNP, it looks like, arithmetic's not very good, but the SNP 16,730, Alba got 859, Tories 3,801, Greens 2,862, which is quite good. Labour 5,719, Lib Dem's 903, and UKIP, which I didn't even realise they were standing, got 44. But that's holding up quite well for the regional vote for the SNP. My quick arithmetic was working out there. That's just perhaps, under 50, I think.
Yes, and perhaps with the list results for Aberdeen Donside and now for Dundee West available, and I think it's apparent that the Alba party has not punched through in the results there. I think you said 836 votes on the list for Dundee West, out of about what felt like about 25,000 votes, if I was listening to you. It doesn't feel like they're making an impact there either. Now, again, it's difficult and dangerous to extrapolate from only two results, but do we think that this might indicate that, especially in the northeast, where one might expect that the leader of the Alba party would have still a personal following and a personal support, does this indicate that maybe they're struggling?
Looks like it.
And certainly and of course we've the Alba party has launched itself and has come to establish itself and campaign in a period of only a very few weeks, and so they have there is clearly an achievement there. But from your own experience campaigning on the streets, were people talking about the Alba party, or was it something that just didn't feature? I'll ask Linda first of all.
No, it didn't feature here in East Kilbride at all. The other night when we were out and about, we saw one Alba poster in somebody's window, and when I looked at my list, I thought, oh, I know who that is, and I wasn't at all surprised, but because it's somebody who I know would tap into what Alba are saying, and perfectly entitled to tap into what Alba are saying. But that was the only indication of it. Was never mentioned in the doors. Mr. Salmond wasn't mentioned at all to me or by any of the activists that we sort of spoke to afterwards. So it just didn't appear to be a thing. And Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh is heading up the list in Central Scotland. She was never mentioned. There was a hustings, an online hustings in East Kilbride a couple of weeks ago, but I don't think it was well attended, and we just never heard it mentioned.
No. And Siobhan, how about you in the streets of Dundee?
There was, I seen a few Alba, if I'm honest. Houses, and there was a couple of schemes in Dundee where it was like, will they go? But clearly not. I was saying earlier on, I had one very, very interesting discussion. I think he said he was very torn over his second vote, and his friends were voting Alpa. He was unsure. What was really, really interesting is, and he said it about 5 or 6 times, and he says, I just can't escape the fact that I cannot stop thinking that this party was set up just to get back at Nicola Sturgeon, and he kept coming round to that. He kept coming round to that, no matter what he said. He was saying, I get it, because he was a big activist from 2014, and he says, and all my friends are voting for it, but that's what he kept coming back to. And that was really the only discussion I had. The only time it was mentioned, they were out and about. When I was out leafleting yesterday doing the knock-up cards, they were out and about, and there was a friend who got beeped, from an Alba car behind him, because he was at what we called the Shona-mobile. He had a photo of Shona, and kind of thing. But they were relatively loud in terms of their presence, which was a quite good use of resources, I suppose, because they wouldn't have had much data to go on. But that was the only discussion that I had with Alpa. I think one woman said, I would never vote for Alex Salmond if my, so there was hints, but it was never positive.
Yeah, so it's and as I say, with Alba having established itself very shortly before the short election campaign started, it's not a surprise that they've encountered a number of difficulties, and also the challenges of
with all due respect, as well, that it wasn't necessarily just because it was new. It was also because the fundamental contradiction at Alpa is that the only thing they had going for them was the name of Alex Salmond, but Alex Salmond was fundamentally unpopular, so they were never going to quite get that mass vote that I think they hoped they would.
I think that's a fair reflection with at least the approval ratings that Mr. Salmond was receiving, which were south of Boris Johnson's. It's not a surprise that they've encountered those challenges, and also that the campaigning was largely online, and we know that online campaigning doesn't connect with a huge section of the electorate in any meaningful way at the moment, despite the best efforts of the parties to shift online, especially during the pandemic. But it's just it still is not it still hasn't developed to a place where people are, where it seems to work effectively with people, is what I'm saying bluntly. It's still a very limited number of people who the online campaigning actually touches, let alone I'm not convinced that online campaigning has changed anybody's mind, to be honest. I think it gives the impression of hardening people's people adopt a position and then it hardens. Online campaigning doesn't seem to open minds, it seems to harden them and close them.
Can I just say On that point, Andrew, I think that's really interesting, because when I came in last night after the campaigning and the polls closed and stuff, I was sitting looking on Twitter, and I read some of the Alba stuff because it was coming up, and there was one person who said, I'm not very well just now, so I have only been able to make judgments from Twitter, and it looks like Alba are going to get about 20 seats. And I thought, well, there's somebody who's just delusional about, the contribution that social media makes. Because the reality is, if we're in social media, there's not that many people on Twitter, to use the example. And those of us who are on Twitter tend to see stuff from like-minded people.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's just complete fantasy to think that you can look at Twitter and then make projections. And there's too many people now who are, who think that political campaigning is about sitting in front of a screen and a keyboard. And it actually means nothing, really, in the bigger
Arguing with
picture.
people.
Yes, absolutely. Thinking again of election results that are coming in the background, I can see that I can see from Ballot Box Scotland that Dumfriesshire has declared the Conservative candidate Oliver Mundell has been successful, increasing his percentage of the vote by 10 percentage points, up to 19,487 votes, which is 47.7% of the votes. That meaning that Joan McAlpine came second with 15,421 votes, an increase of 3.8%. So both Conservatives and SNP increasing their vote share. However, Oliver Mundell being returned as the member of the Scottish Parliament for Dumfriesshire. Interestingly, both Labour Co-op and the Liberal Democrats seeing, Labour in particular, seeing a significant drop. The Labour vote appears to have split itself between the SNP and the Conservatives, interestingly. And so again, perhaps a sign of some tactical voting taking place in a rural constituency. And so
I'd like to see Joan win that.
Yes, absolutely, and Mr. Mundell retaining the seat is interesting. It'll be interesting to see any analysis of the manner in which that campaign was played out. In terms of some of the seats, we've got the Edinburgh Central declaration, I think, is coming in now.
Right.
Now, as you said, Siobhan, we've heard whispers in the background suggesting that the Conservatives had conceded, and certainly the news media, mainstream news media, was starting to talk about the likelihood of there being a success for Angus Robertson in the seat that Baroness Davidson was departing from, bedecked in ermine and heading for the benches in Westminster, with everything that brings. So we'll watch for a moment and see as we get the returning officer is just making his introductory remarks in respect of Edinburgh Central, and we'll no doubt have the result for you shortly. So we've seen that in the Lothians, we've seen Fiona Hislop holding. We've seen Paul McLennan taking East Lothian.
SNP gain. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. We've seen Lib Dem hold Edinburgh Western, and we're about
no, but
to
SNP
get
gain for Edinburgh Central. It's an SNP gain by about 5,000 votes.
Yeah, and we're about to get the number. We're about to get the numbers for that. We'll see. They're just not coming up yet. So that would appear to be three gains by the SNP across across central Scotland, with the returning officer is taking out. Here we go. Angus Robertson on 16,276, Scott Douglas on 11,544, a turnout of 63%, and a majority for Angus Robertson of 4,732. So that's quite significant. Bonnie Prince Bob, who was another of those who were getting a lot of attention on social media as representing something else, got 363 votes.
So
Right.
who
So
is Bonnie Prince Bob?
I
He's
don't want to know.
Yes, he's
Right.
It,
Right.
it's
Because I
fair.
heard his
It's
name
fair.
this morning. I thought they were making it up. Yeah.
Yes, no. So the candidate stood as Bonnie Prince Bob, and it was my impression was it was a kind of an Alba cipher on the constituency rather than on the list.
Yeah.
no. That's
But
right.
the
Yeah.
but undoubtedly there are differences of opinion, and for independent candidates standing like that, they will undoubtedly attract the attention of all the parties who will criticise them. But insofar as
That is
his
a good.
campaign doesn't appear to have caught light, so Mr.
Yeah.
Robertson
No.
returns to political to the political front line after several years running a communications business. Having lost in Buryshire in the general election in 2017. As a former deputy leader of the SNP, there is a likelihood that this may. Do you think, Linda, this may shift some of the balance of power within the Holyrood SNP?
Oh, no, I don't. I mean, Angus Robertson is very, very much an ally of Nicola Sturgeon and John Swinney. So there will be partnership work in there. No doubt there'll be those who will try, it'll start right away, like Angus Robertson makes bid to oust Sturgeon and all that complete and utter nonsense. But no, they will be a team and they will do what's best for the move forward to independence. That's all that will matter to Angus Robertson. Looking after his constituency and, collectively with the rest of the SNP group, heading for a referendum, because to get out of this horrible time we're in and for a good recovery, we need independence. And the democratic referendum is the way to take people with us on that.
Absolutely. It appears that he's taken votes from 3% of the votes from Conservatives, 6% from Labour, and also taken some Green votes as well. So appears to have taken votes across the board largely in that
10%
election.
increase. Yeah. It's a good result. It is a good result. Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm walking because the sunlight was just getting, would you believe it, sunlight after snow this morning. So I moved. There we are.
You're still perfectly framed. Don't worry. But yes, that's a good point. We'll pick up on it just now. Certainly, my own experience yesterday of campaigning in bright sunshine and then a hailstorm for 20 minutes that left a quarter of an inch of hail on the ground, and then perpetually driving rain for most of the afternoon, and then bright sunshine again in the evening, which meant that it just needed to be 4 different jackets and 4 different bonnets in the back of the car.
Yes.
Linda, first of all, do you think that the vagaries, thinking firstly there was concern about the weather impacting on the turnout, but now we seem to have had an increased turnout. Do you think that the traditional views of Scottish voters being scared of a little bit of weather, do you think that's put that myth to bed?
Well, do you know, one of our activists was saying that he reckons that part of the high turnout was all the people who looked out the window in the morning and thought, God, I'll be blowed if I'm going out in that. And then as the weather progressively got better all day, they all started piling out in the evening. So he could have a point up to a point. But it was crazy here. It really was, the way the weather was. Yeah.
And Siobhan, what have you experienced? Do you think the people of Dundee were chased away by the perpetually changing weather yesterday, or were they made of sterner stuff?
Do you know what? You know what was weird? Like, I had my sunglasses on, and then it started hailstones. So it was that kind of day where I was like, it was hailstones, but I had my sunglasses because obviously you can't keep changing now. But it was funny. When I woke up and I thought it was a beautiful day, and I thought, right, this is good, and then it was freezing, and then it was just that kind of. And I just kept thinking, good weather bodes well for us, And I think you might be right. It seemed to be later on in the day where people began to you began to see the queues gather. I have a friend. He was first there, 7:00 in to vote. But we did have a lot of postal votes as well. There was I did a postal vote for the first time ever. So that probably lended to the increase in votes too. So that's a good thing, and that might be something to think about moving forward as well. But yes, it was phenomenally strange weather over the last couple of weeks, isn't it? It's just like you say, 4 seasons in an hour.
Definitely, which is very traditional Scottish weather, especially in springtime. But but no, it was interesting to see the perseverance of voters who were forming socially distanced queues at polling stations at 9 o'clock last night. Whereas maybe the weather wasn't too wet, but it was certainly getting colder. But it was encouraging to see that they were able to persist. But attempting to get out the vote in the teeth of a hailstorm was not a straightforward process. I can assure you. But in terms of the result in Edinburgh Central, with Angus Robertson taking the seat for the SNP from the Conservatives, do you think that reflects that the Conservatives holding that seat was simply on the basis of the publicity and the personality of Ruth Davidson, rather than it being a traditional Tory heartland? Linda, what do you think?
Yeah. I guess there was a bit of that. I can't remember what the majority she had was. I don't know if either of you.
Wasn't much.
Yes,
was it not much?
I'll find it for you, but give us your thoughts at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there may have been an element of that. But I think, part of Angus's win, or part of the SNP win, however you want to term it, has perhaps been the recognition that actually they didn't get good service as a constituency from the Conservatives. Ruth Davidson never made any defence of the fact that she didn't hold surgeries, for example. So I think there was a recognition that it was a vehicle for Ruth Davidson to be in Parliament and be leader of the group. And the electorate don't like being taken for granted like that, so I think there's an element of that there.
I think that's very fair. Her majority at the 2016 election was 610. Right. So by no means a thumping majority. She beat Alison Dickey, who was the SNP candidate, and actually it was a fairly broadly split constituency. Ruth won just over 10,000. The SNP were just under 10,000. Labour were just over 7,500 with Sarah Boyack, and the Greens polled well at 4,500. So it's obviously been a seat that's changed, but certainly a significant change now. With a 10% increase in the SNP vote and the Conservative and the Labour candidate. One aspect
I do think. No.
Go on, Siobhan.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I do think that Edinburgh is one of those constituencies where Brexit does come into account there, because it was very pro-Europe, and I think that would have been hard to align another Conservative victory with that. I think the opposite, I suppose, is the Banff and Buchan Coast. We were very, very lucky. Hold on it for the exact opposite reason. But that would have been.
No, it's an interesting point, and I'd welcome both your thoughts on it. It's certainly been something that I've been discussing with activists in Edinburgh over the past 2 or 3 weeks. Firstly, the concern that Brexit would have encouraged the departure of young working families who had come to set up home in Scotland and to work and to establish a new life, and whether the Brexit experience had persuaded them to leave. I think the concluded view here was that the Scottish Government and Scots had made such a point of making it absolutely clear that these new Scots were welcome and should remain if they wanted to. In fact, probably negated that aspect. However, in Edinburgh Central in particular, and Edinburgh Southern, both of which have large university populations, and Edinburgh Central, I think, has about 8,000 voters who are not who are registered, who are not Scottish citizens. Both Brexit and COVID combining, meaning that the academics and researchers and students are not present in the constituencies to the same extent at the moment, and that might have had an effect. So do you think that in terms of the result in Edinburgh Central that Brexit or the pandemic have had an effect, or is it simply that Baroness Davidson has gone? I'll ask you first, Linda.
You haven't a clue, Andrew. I don't know. I don't. I don't know enough
I'm so glad
about
you could say that.
Well, I don't know enough about it to really have a considered opinion. You could get impressions about all of these things. I mean, I know that there are EU nationals who across Scotland, and I know a lot in Edinburgh, who, yes, have real concerns about the situation, who are absolutely, I would go as far as saying grateful that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP have been so vocal about how welcome people are. But it's still difficult because if you're living in a nation that's very welcoming and everything else, but you know that the great powers of things that happen to that nation are dictated by elsewhere, you're not going to have a security about the future of your family or anything else. So I think it's a really, really difficult thing. And I have direct involvement with families with European nationality who are really, really concerned. It's not just about living here and working here. It's about the ability of your own family to come and visit you. Like if you are, say, Dutch, and you are used to your mother and father coming over every year to visit you, or you think you want to have your sister and her family over for Christmas, and it all becomes very, very complicated all of a sudden. So it's not just about the living here and working here, it's about the quality of your ongoing family life and the ability to have relationships out with Scotland. So there's a lot of issues in there that haven't even played out yet for people. And I'm really worried that not only will we see fewer new families coming in to join us, new single people coming in to join us, but that we will see an exodus as time goes on when these difficulties come into play. That's why, it's one of the main reasons for me that we need independence is that not just the ability to make our own decisions and look after the needs of our own nation, but to be blooming fair to people that have chosen to live here and not have them feel that they have to move away from what has become their country. And sad.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I'm seeing one more result: Midlothian North and Musselburgh, which is an SNP hold for Colin Beattie, with a drop in the Conservative vote, a rise in the Labour vote. Interestingly, of course, that seat is contiguous to East Lothian, where Paul McLennan was successful, but a hold there. So that eastern extremity of the Lothian regional of the Lothian region for the list going consistently SNP at the moment. Interestingly, I can see that for Fergus Ewing and also obviously so Fergus Ewing and Inverness and also for Banff and Buchan Coast, the significant rises in the Conservative vote. I think it was 10% increase in Banff, and it's an 8% in Inverness. So there's maybe still a little bit of a trend or a theme developing there. And of course, we saw an increase of 10% at the other end of the country in Dumfriesshire. So, do we think it is possibly the case that the what was very clearly a call for tactical voting from the Conservatives in their campaign literature? Do you think there's beginning to be evidence that is playing out?
It's starting to look like it, isn't it?
And do you think there's a consistency there insofar as we've touched on already this afternoon the absence of any positive case for the union being made by any of the unionist parties, and now it appears that the Conservatives are maybe the case that they're able to obtain electoral success by persuading people to vote tactically?
It's starting to look a bit that way, but one of the other interesting things about the Conservative campaign was when you looked at the leaflets, they were doing what they said, and I'm paraphrasing, was stop the SNP or you will have a referendum. So they were conceding the fact that we should have a referendum if there's a majority. So, for all it's looking as if the tactics may be working in some places, actually the other side of that tactic is the concession that democracy demands a referendum. So,
yeah.
No, absolutely. And Siobhan, what do you think? Do you think there's evidence here of perhaps of tactical voting starting to appear in at least in the north and in the south of the country?
I mean, it could be. It could be. It certainly looks a bit like it as well. Either that, or people have been just a bit more hardened towards the union in the absence of maybe Anna Sarwar's slightly all these attempts to be conciliatory and take no side, if that makes sense. But yes, it's an interesting one. But yeah, like it could be a bit of both, really, isn't it? I think that if you are pro-union, then I think, or if you're quite significantly pro-union, in terms of a scale of 1 to 10 type thing, then you might have been disappointed in the Labour Party response. And if it goes back to, Linda, what you were saying earlier on, that these are the constitutional issues look like they were high on the agenda, that would make sense that you would vote Conservative to try and save the union, because the Labour would have been seen as even more wishy-washy than before from a unionist perspective.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting view. So there's certainly discussion in England today as a result of in light of the result in the by-election in Hartlepool, that the traditional left and right characterisation of politics may be slipping away in England, and I wonder if we're seeing a similar slipping away of left and right, but for different reasons and in different ways in Scotland. The left and right distinction not being so impactful now, and it's whether you support independence or not.
I think there's a bit of that. I think politics has become polarised. Yeah, right across these islands, I think politics has become rather polarised. Yeah.
Does that then mean that those simply that in the same way as the Conservative Party in England and Wales appears to have hoovered up the votes of UKIP members and the rest, or hoovered back in, is maybe the better way of putting it, those who had gone off to UKIP? In the same way, in a similar way, the Conservative Party in Scotland is looking to hoover up Lib Dem and Labour voters who, to use your words, Siobhan, aren't strong enough on the union and aren't determined enough to impose the union, no matter what it is the people of Scotland would like. What do you think, Siobhan?
I think it does fit in with that kind of increase in polarisation that Linda was talking about, wasn't it? And I do think that it kind of surprised me that the Conservatives are kind of gaining in some areas, because the leaflets were awful. But I suppose I'm looking at it from a kind of independence perspective. They were quite aggressive, they were demanding, they were arrogant, they were bereft of policy, and I think that maybe the increases in those areas, it probably does suggest that that's where the constitution was, because there was nothing else to vote for. In terms of Conservative, if you're looking for policy, you weren't really getting that much there. So it kind of does show you, I suppose, that I said at the very first result, I thought, oh my God, this looks like a straight fight between SNP and Tories, and that's become increasingly more likely. It's a shame, because I would have, like I said, I would have preferred Labour to come into second place. I think they're just more progressive. But I think this has been happening for a while now, isn't it? That the hardened unionists have moved across, and the class alignment, I suppose, is disappearing, like you say, and not just in England but in Scotland as well.
Yes, we were talking earlier on the programme about the inheritance and whether people are and Linda, as a politician of many years' experience, and through the process of the rise and fall, the fall of the Labour Party as a force in Scottish politics in particular, a suggestion perhaps from the north of England that people are now no longer inheriting their political views from their parents and grandparents in the same way that once they were, and that the family based you can only vote one way because otherwise your granny or granddad will be spinning in their grave. approach to politics. That's maybe reducing now, and that's why we're seeing potentially Labour voters in England voting Conservative, but more importantly in Scotland, people being much more prepared to vote tactically if they believe in the Union above all else.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think that's all a mark in Scotland of the polarisation of where we're at, and it's quite clearly about independence or not independence. And I actually don't think that's a terribly unhealthy choice to be making when you're talking about a very sensible civic nationalism and a move to independence, and those who, for whatever reason, believe that they don't want to do that. I think that's quite healthy. And all this nonsense that we get told, Willie Rennie's the worst for it, divisive politics. Alex Cole Hamilton's always on about the divisions caused. It's a pile of nonsense. The divisions that are getting caused are by them, the way they keep blooming going on about it. I can't remember a happier time in Scottish politics than when we were campaigning for the referendum. And, you certainly weren't finding the independent side being hugely divisive. So I wish we could just knock that one in the head. So I think it's quite healthy. What I don't find healthy is what's happening in England. I feel it's really, really concerning. And I suppose part of that is the lack of an alternative, because the Lib Dems just lost it completely by going into coalition with the Tories. Their credibility was completely shot. We now have it's difficult to describe the current Tory party because it's not as straightforward as very right-wing. It's... Yeah. I don't quite know how to describe it. Extremely worrying, very privileged and elitist, and that's there. You've then got a Labour Party that have lost being left-wing, and I don't really know what they're about, apart from... Well, I couldn't even say they're opposed to the Tories because they don't appear to be in an awful lot of ways. So England doesn't really have an alternative. And I think that's actually more worrying. Politics in England are much more worrying than politics in Wales or Scotland at the moment. And I don't quite know where it's going, but I have a concern for it. And I don't know what the answer is on that.
It's interesting that you were talking. It's interesting that we're touching on Labour politics at the moment. Edinburgh South has just declared. Edinburgh Southern has just declared with Daniel Johnson with 20,760 seats. Katrina MacDonald, the SNP candidate, coming second with 16,738 votes, and so a majority for Daniel Johnson of 4,022. So the two closely interlinked seats in Edinburgh, Edinburgh Western and Edinburgh Southern, seeing no change. And I think I've not had a chance to look at the Edinburgh Southern numbers closely yet, but certainly we know from the Edinburgh Western numbers that clearly tactical voting playing a part with voters of all colours aligning behind Alex Cole Hamilton. Go on, Siobhan.
Conservatives went down by quite a bit and Labour went up. SNP went up as well, actually. Katrina did well. But yes, there certainly was a shift there. Yep.
It's so we're seeing those two Edinburgh seats now declared. But perhaps in that case we can at some point, Linda, we can ask the voters of Edinburgh Southern to explain what it is they think the Labour policies are, because they seem to have voted for them. If it's anything beyond simply being against the union, against independence, but yes, the interesting. So the perspective of Edinburgh politics changing a little bit today, with the SNP gaining Edinburgh Central, and obviously a very high profile seat, not a straight competition with Baroness Davidson, but still a seat that had her legacy attached to it, and so an important change there, and an important change in East Lothian as well. But we will see the other Edinburgh seats of Edinburgh North and Leith and Edinburgh Eastern. They're due to declare tomorrow, is my understanding, and so we'll see a complete picture. But certainly, I think, is it fair to say that Edinburgh has had a reputation for tactical voting for several years, and all we're seeing today is the cementing of that reputation as a city that has some tactical voting going on.
It's just Edinburgh, really, Andrew.
That's a very fair comment. I can say I was born in Aberdeen, so that's fine. I've got no problem with that.
Oh well, that's okay.
I just happen to live here. No, that's good. But also, I think we've seen Cunningham South as an SNP
All right.
hold. I'll get the numbers for that for you. I'm pretty sure it's. I saw it going past very quickly. We'll get that for you. Here we are. Yes, we're seeing Ruth Maguire with a slightly reduced percentage of the vote, but Ruth Maguire returned as the SNP MSP for Cunningham South with 15,208 votes. Second was Louise McFater for the Labour Party with 7,256, and third was David Rocks for the Conservatives. And so I'm just looking for the majority. I can't see a majority for that yet, but certainly more than 50% of the vote for Ruth Maguire in Cunningham South. So a majority of almost 8,000 there. So a return for Ruth Maguire, who was elected first, I think, in 2016 to Cunningham South. I don't think we've seen Cunningham North yet, but I'm sure it will be not far away.
That might be tomorrow.
It could well be to give them some chance. Any reflections on Ruth Maguire being returned again as the MSP for Cunningham North? Siobhan?
I'm delighted at that. Oh, sorry.
Go on,
No,
Linda.
that's great, actually. I really like Ruth. I think she's done some great work, and I'm so really, really happy that she's back. And I think it was an increased majority as well, so that's good.
And Linda, of course, you're
yeah, she's been great, Ruth. She's been convener of the name of the committee, which I always get wrong, Equalities and Human Rights. Yeah, Equalities and Human Rights Committee. When Christina McKelvey was put up to government to do the Equalities and Human Rights role, Ruth took over as convener of that committee, and she's been great. She's been absolutely super. And she's a smashing colleague. She's got a lovely way with her, Ruth. She's got that a quality that I like in people. She has a wonderfully gentle way of putting things forward. But actually, there's a rod of steel there, you know. And she's made some excellent contributions, both in the chamber, at committee, and in her constituency. So, yeah, I'm really pleased she's back.
Yeah, I think it would have been a loss had she lost for sure.
Aye.
Yeah.
Well, most definitely, and interestingly, I can see just looking very briefly. We touched earlier on Jada Franson's very brief appearance in Glasgow Southern. I can see that the Thornwood Bar, which is a bar which has been at the forefront of some politics during the lockdown, and the Thornwood is insisting that this afternoon they served more pints than Jada Franson got votes, which is probably not a bad measure of success in the circumstances. So both the bars and the people of Glasgow Southern rejecting. Both the pubs and the people of Glasgow Southern rejecting Jada Franson's racism and fascism at the polls yesterday. So I'm trying to see a total number for the number of seats that have been returned. We must be into the 40s. So we're coming to I think we're probably coming to a conclusion in terms of the number of seats we're going to see declared today. And it's I would like to think that, having gone through the process of 42 out of 48 seats have declared so far today, I would like to think that the returning officers and their staff, who will be working so hard in circumstances that are very different for them and in ways that are and working practices that are very different from them, they will have a difficult and taxing day. We all know how hard they work and how fundamental they are to the success and the persistence of the democracy that we enjoy. but they'll be pretty tired after a day's counting and tallying in a very different environment and a very different set of circumstances than that they're used to. And so I'm pretty sure that they'll be looking forward to a rest and a chance to catch their breath before they set off again and seek to do it all again tomorrow as we complete both the constituency seats, but fundamentally and most importantly, and especially in light of the discussion we've had this afternoon about the importance of the Parliament being representative of the population, that we will see the list votes, the list seats being declared tomorrow as well. So I'll ask you firstly, Siobhan, have you got any sense as to where you think the list votes are going to go in terms in light of the constituency votes we've seen so far today?
Well, I mean, obviously SNP are going to lose a few, aren't they, because we've gained on the constituency. I think the Greens will probably do relatively well, maybe not as well as the polling suggests, but I think they'll certainly increase their vote. I hope Labour do okay as well, if I'm honest. I think that Alba will get no seats from. I think that there was a chance they might have got a seat in the northeast, but even I'm just hearing that even in Alex Salmond's old MP constituency area, the Greens have fared better than Alba have in that constituency. So there's no way that Alba is going to get a seat. So it will be, the Greens as definitely the second and main pro-independence party after the SNP. I think we'll definitely get a pro-independence majority, and it's kind of looking, trying not to jinx it, that we might get 65 votes as the SNP. And there's not much point of pretending that I'm no SNP, as I keep saying, but so
That's
we'll
okay.
see what happens. Might as well just hate tattooed,
You're amongst friends. You're fine, Siobhan. Linda, in terms of, and obviously there are no guarantees, and this is extrapolating and hypothesizing from apples to pears. But what's your sense of the way in which you think that it's possible the list votes the list seats might start to be allocated tomorrow?
Oh, do you know, I hate making predictions. I've got that ridiculous superstition that if you make predictions, it's bad, I mean, certainly, I probably generally agree with what Siobhan has said. And by the way, I'm SNP too. Did MD realise? The fact that there's a higher turnout, the fact that some of the figures we've been hearing that our main candidate up in the northeast has been tweeting, Fatima's been tweeting some of the figures, and they're looking very hopeful. And it was the northeast that we broke the system before when we got the seats on the list. I would love to see that again. I really would. That would be just fabulous. I think the Greens probably will do well. Like Siobhan, I don't think they'll do as well as the polls are saying, because that tends to be the way of it. But I know that Patrick Harvey's bouncing along with him with a bad leg to, he's seeming really happy with what he's picking up, and I'm pleased to see that. Yeah.
Well, that's outstanding. That's a good point. What do you think and again, more predictions, my apologies, will not hold you to them. What do you think? What's your view of the prospects for the Green Party?
I think they'll do well, but like Siobhan says, I don't think they'll do as well as the polls have said. I think some of the commentators have been saying 10, Siobhan and Andrew. I think that's what's been getting said. They've got 6 at the moment, one more than the Lib Dems, and then they lost Andy Whiteman, so they went down to 5, which was the same. So 6. That's interesting. We've never talked about Andy Whiteman in the Highlands. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. 7 or 8 for the Greens, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well.
I'll make predictions for another party, because I won't feel so passionately about it if I think
it's an interesting question that you raise. Now, I was meaning to talk about Mr. Whiteman. Well, obviously, we'll discover what has happened tomorrow. I think he's regarded very much as in a sense, as a backroom MSP. He worked so hard and so assiduously in the context of land reform in particular, but that's in a way that's kind of legislative, and it's not standing in front of the Forth Bridge taking selfies. Is my point. He was a very thank you. He was a very hard-working back. So that means he had less of a public profile. However, the issues upon which he is the expert, perhaps, or is one of the experts, are perhaps the most important in the Highlands and Islands. So, do you think, in terms of his lack of profile, but his expertise and specialism in land reform, do you think that sets him up with a good chance on the list in the Highlands? Linda, what do you think?
I'm not convinced. I mean, I think Andy's a loss to anybody, because, I mean, regardless of whether you agree with his policies, his actions, or anything else, the man is an intellect. And I have enjoyed very much as Deputy Presiding Officer listening to some of his contributions, because they were excellent. And yes, he's done a lot of work. But, I was trying to think about it politically, because at the end of the day, it's politics. And you're going to get a lot of Green members who are going to be really angry at him for leaving the party, who just will not vote for him for that reason in the Highlands. Yes. And are there enough others who are aware of what he does and care passionately about his main subjects that would take him to enough? I'm not convinced.
That's kind of what I was thinking as well, Linda. It was that kind of... I mean, I love Andy White. I think he's great, and like you say, the stuff he's done on land reform is brilliant, but it is quite niche in terms of kind of from the ordinary population type of thing, and I do think that he's just not quite got that well known aspect to him that might carry him through for a seat, which is a shame. Because I would have liked to have seen him getting it, but I'm just not convinced that'll work out for him, actually, which is a bit of a shame. I'm going to say my biggest hope is that Fatima Joji gets a seat on the list in the North East. That would make it complete for me.
Rosa Sally in Glasgow. If I could pick two things to happen, it would be Fatima and Rosa.
Absolutely, yeah.
There we go. I'm seeing coming in now an SNP hold for Aberdeen Central coming in. So again, no change there. So no degradation in the number of SNP constituency seats. We'll find the numbers for that as quickly as we can. It'll be, but again, a consistent pattern in that sense of the SNP making marginal gains, or making gains in marginal seats. But not losing seats. So that's and in the context of the rise of, or the reappearance of certain candidates who were very closely associated with the North East, do you think that stronghold amongst the SNP vote in Aberdeen Donside and Aberdeen Central, do you think that indicates that the SNP vote more generally is holding up?
Yeah.
Siobhan, I'll ask you first.
Yeah, no, that's certainly what I'm hoping, and that's what it's beginning to look like, isn't it? Is that we're holding in, just making those small gains, just enough to take over the 65 seat category. So this is looking good. I was feeling slightly nervous earlier on, but I'm feeling a lot better now. And I am very philosophical. I do think that, independence is coming, etc., etc. But yes, I was slightly nervous this morning, but it does look like we're holding. And those 3 gains, I think, does give us this cushion that allows just a little bit of manoeuvring now. So I'll probably sleep better tonight.
Yes, that's very fair. For Aberdeen Central, we see Kevin Stewart being returned with 14,217 votes. and second was Douglas Lumsden for the Conservatives on 7,623, and Labour down 7%, Barry Black with 6,294 votes. So marginal rises there for the Conservatives and the SNP. Actually, the largest change in that, the second largest change there was Guy Ingerson, the Scottish Green candidate, who increased their share of the vote by 6 percentage points, albeit up to 2,087. But a good performance by the Green candidate in Aberdeen Central. And interesting, if we see more performances by Green candidates in the North East, thinking in particular of the challenges that especially the Aberdeen economy and perhaps some of the economies in Ross and Cromarty and the Cromarty Firth have with the plans to decarbonise and reorganise the offshore oil and gas sector in Scotland. So interesting to see Green candidates making progress there. Do you think that the campaigning from both the SNP and the Greens on decarbonising the economy, do you think this is evidence that it's starting to cut through, Linda?
I would like to think so. I'm not convinced that it's real. I could go as far as to say cutting through yet. I think there's a way to go with that yet. It's a difficult one because people don't particularly think of it as real, because it's not something that's seen affecting you day to day. And when you're in the middle of a pandemic and people are worried about health and their salaries and their house above their head and all that, to start to talk about something that we need to do to save the planet, for decades down the line, is a difficult thing to say is as important. And whilst intellectually anybody that sat and thought about it would recognise that it is, if you're really struggling thinking about next week, you're not going to think about the next decade.
Of course. I'll take us to East Renfrewshire very quickly, where Eastwood has declared we're returning. Jackson Carlaw has returned with 17,911 votes. Colm Merrick for the SNP coming second with 15,695 votes. That's a 6% increase for both the Conservatives and a 6% increase for the SNP, a 15% drop for the Labour vote. It's a very marginal swing to the Conservatives, 0.4%, so effectively no change. But Jackson Carlaw's personal vote maintaining and his retaining the seat even after the loss of his position as leader of the Conservatives in Scotland.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Linda, what do you think that says about?
I think that's interesting. I'm disappointed in that. I don't know if you feel the same, Siobhan. I would have liked to see Colm take that. It would have been a huge thing. I'll tell you the other thing that's interesting is, Andrew saying there about the 6% increase again in both Conservative and SNP. And this is a pattern we're starting to see with Labour falling. So it is about that polarisation we were talking about. But, I heard Jackie Bailey on earlier on after a few results and saying, and she was going on saying about, the results that we're seeing that Labour was on the rise and that, we were on a knife edge and we're going to move forward for the next Scottish Parliament election with Labour being dominant. Well, the results that have come in since would certainly not hold up that theory. Siobhan, what do you think? I don't know what happened in Dundee, for example, to Labour.
I don't even know what the Labour. No, in Dundee. No, Labour dropped. The candidate wasn't particularly impressive. I think she dropped by about 6%. There was moments earlier on, Linda, where I thought, the Labour Party are going to just have that tiny little increase before they kind of, put it away. But that doesn't look like it's happening, does it? And I do think it does. We can't ignore this as much as what people might want to. We can't ignore the constitutional question. And I think that Anna Sarwar personally polled quite well. It never doesn't seem to have quite translated into votes. But the position that Labour are trying to hold on this constitutional issue ends up just isolating both, because those who are not even pro-independence, but pro-referendum are within the Labour Party, and there's quite a lot, isn't there, are being felt isolated. I would have much preferred Monica Lennon as the leader of the Labour Party, because I think it was a much more honest approach. But if you're a unionist, then said that before, the Labour Party doesn't quite cut it. So they're trying to please everybody but please nobody, and I think that's maybe beginning to show.
You're right. You can't please everybody.
Yeah, which is exactly what Labour tried to do over the Brexit referendum and across, like in England, and it didn't succeed.
Trying to do that as well now. You know, my granny was right. You can't please everybody all the time.
Yep.
Exactly. Exactly.
I'm seeing that for Edinburgh Southern, the Conservative vote dropped by 14%, and similarly split between the Labour. So 10% increase for Labour, 4% increase for the SNP, and a 14% drop for the Conservatives in Edinburgh Southern.
Well, there you go. Andrew comes back. Edinburgh just blows a hole in our theories.
You can rely on me to do that. Always. I'm hearing suggestions that for Jackie Bailey's constituency in Dumbarton, that it's going to the count is being re-examined because it's so close. I don't have any other information other than that. So we will see what appears from there. Currently we're seeing the SNP with 36 seats, the Lib Dems with 4, the Conservatives with 3, and the Labour Party with 1 seat. So that gives us 44 seats have declared this afternoon. So the returning officers and their staff have done sterling service to count and tally and complete the process in such difficult, such unprecedented circumstances such as these, is what I'm trying to say. So that's a great success for those who are tasked with the difficult challenge of organising and making these events, making these processes work safely and effectively and efficiently and quickly. Because we've had people's expectations still very much were that we would are fixed with the idea of results appearing in the middle of the night, and we've had to do things in a very different way this time. I'm not seeing any other seats declaring at the moment, but we'll see. We haven't seen a great deal of news from the one of the other large competitions in the UK at the moment, which is for the English councils. I think early results I saw earlier today, we're starting to see the same effect as we'd seen with the by-election in Hartlepool, with the Conservatives making gains. And that, I think, is carried on with something like 150 seats being won by the Conservatives so far. So there is perhaps an ongoing. That's maybe it's maybe additional evidence of the way in which the political changes that we've discussed already this afternoon are continuing to play out in England and Wales. And at the same time, we're seeing a different political dynamic in Scotland, as you would expect, with the SNP so far continuing to hold their seats, not losing any marginal seats, but increasing their number of constituency seats by winning the 3 of their 6 key target seats of Ayr, East Lothian, and Edinburgh Central. All seats in the central belt of Scotland. So we'll see. Do we have any other predictions in terms of Linda? Thinking of you first of all as someone who's deeply embedded in sunny Lanarkshire. We've heard Cunningham South, we've heard Coatbridge, we've heard Airdrie. What's your feeling more generally for the likely outcome for the likely outcome in Lanarkshire?
Well, I think the results we've seen so far, both in South Lanarkshire and North Lanarkshire, would certainly suggest that the SNP will hold all the constituency seats. That would appear not to be an issue unless there's a major upset in one of them. So that's great. I mean, my own one, East Kilbride is tomorrow. That gets declared, and Colette Stevenson, I hope, will be returned. Same as I hope Mary McCallan will be returned in Clydesdale to replace Aileen Campbell. So then we get on to the list, which will be interesting because the list in Central Scotland is an interesting one. We've never returned a Green, for example, ever. And the current list MSPs are 3 Conservative and 4 Labour. So we didn't get a Lib Dem last time round either. The original regional lists for Central Scotland had, when it was Labour dominated, had SNP, Tory and Lib Dem. So that's an interesting one. We have Alba standing. Tasmin Ahmed Sheikh is heading up the list there. I would absolutely adore it if we got a list seat in Central Scotland, as well as taking the 9 constituencies. That would be fabulous. I actually wouldn't mind seeing the top of the Green list. And the girl, her name escapes me, I'm sorry about that, but I know, I can't remember her name.
Lorna Slater's the co-leader of the Greens.
No, it's not. Is it Megan? It might be Megan someone. Can't remember. But anyway, I've heard she's very impressive. I haven't personally met her, but I've heard some of the SNP activists saying that they have been impressed by her. So obviously, first of all, I would like to see SNP, and that would be Danish Ashraf, who's a councillor in Cumbernauld, who's top of the list for us, and he's a great young man. That would be wonderful. Second choice would be, it'd be great to see a Green person. A Green person, that sounds weird, doesn't it? As if you've a Green person. A Green candidate returned.
That's more like it.
It was like, close off, you know.
And Siobhan, what's your... and
that would be great. I'd love to see that.
Absolutely, thank you, Linda. And Siobhan, what are your predictions for tomorrow for Tayside and for Southern Aberdeenshire?
I think that Shona Robertson will increase the vote. I think they'll increase the share. I think that'll echo Dundee West today. So she'll comfortably win, but I also think she'll gain more as well. I think the turnout will suggest that, especially in Dundee. I think Graham, Angus South is my constituency, even though my branch is in Dundee. I think Graham will win relatively easy. I would, like I said, I would love to see Fatima get a list seat on the North East. That would be my genuine joy of this election. I would love to see Maggie Chapman get a seat. I think she absolutely deserves one. Not sure that will happen. However, I think we'll probably get a few Conservatives there in the North East. So the North East, as you were saying, Linda, that was the one where we bucked the trend. So there's a hope that it could still happen, but I'm just not convinced. I think, if we can get a Green seat there, that would be great.
Absolutely. We're hearing a little bit of reporting just coming in from news sources, a suggestion that in an interview, Alex Salmond has conceded that it is unlikely that the Alba party will win any seats at all. We'll not finish on that. However, it strikes me that it would be interesting to reflect. So for senior politicians like Kenny McCaskill, and politicians who had very high hopes like Chris McElhaney, Linda, where do you think that if that is the case, if the Alba party is unsuccessful in obtaining any seats, where do you think that leaves Kenny McCaskill, and where do you think that leaves Alex Salmond?
Well, Alex Salmond, first of all, I think he said in an interview that I read during the week or the week before that they were going to have a leadership contest in the Alba party because they've never had an elected leader. So it'll be interesting to see whether he puts himself forward for that or not. It will be interesting to see whether, in fact, the party maintains or becomes a bit of a rump and then disappears. Kenny McCaskill and Neil Hanvey. I don't know Neil Hanvey at all. I just know him by reputation. Kenny, I find it really upsetting that Kenny went to Alba. I would just not have wanted that to happen. But the bottom line is they were elected as SNP MPs. As far as I'm concerned, they should already have left Westminster. I believe absolutely strongly that if you're elected by a party and activists have put you there and put their trust in you and everything else, and you choose to go to another party, I think you should leave and have a by-election and stand in your own right. I've always thought that. So it'll be interesting to see what Kenny and Neil Hanvey do. I would urge them to do the right.
Thank you, Linda. And Siobhan, any reflections from you on the possibility that, as Alex Salmon has said to have conceded, that the Alba party will not capture any list seats at Holyrood in this election?
I mean, I don't want to say I told you so, but I think that most serious political commentators would have recognised that from almost the beginning that Alba weren't really going to make the gains that they hoped that they would. We had this in the 2016. I remember Rise and Rise supporters, talking about how they'll take the Scottish Parliament by storm, etc., and that for all the buff and bluster, it never quite happened to any degree that they thought. I think that, I said that earlier, that the ultimate contradiction for Alba is that, the man that gives them the probably the 2% that they seem to be getting is also the man that would never get them any, way forward. I've made my I've made my comments on Alba quite clear. I think that it's a deeply fundamentally problematic party for me. I wasn't quite, I fluctuated between laughing and being genuinely upset, actually, at some of the the characters that joined the Alba, but I was never ever convinced that they were going to get anywhere or make headway. I just don't think that they have the means, the knowledge, or the will to be a mass party. I'm not sure they know how to engage people on a collective, collaborative basis. It seemed to me that they were taking the policies that were quite marginal to the Scottish population and then deciding on those, if you look at their manifesto as well. So there was never really, for me, a notion that they actually effectively tried to engage the population on any meaningful way. I know that Twitter, Linda, you've said this, but I know that Twitter's not quite a reflection of reality. But what I found from a lot of Alba supporters online, that there was a wee bit of delusion as to how they were going to take, the Parliament by storm, and and I just thought, there's no evidence to back this up. There was an interest in, follow the maths, and that seemed to be quite a mantra. Follow the maths, follow the maths. It's like, well, what about humanity? What about, just kind of good policies? So to be honest, I never really thought they were going to get far. And I have to say, I'm glad that this is the case. I'm not particularly convinced they were a progressive nationalism that I agreed with, to be honest. I suppose that's all I've got to say on that.
That's all right. Thank you, Siobhan. That's very kind of you. Now I'm looking at the time, and we're coming up to 8 o'clock on Friday the 7th of May. What I would like to do is to say thank you to Kate Monaghan and to Siobhan Tolland and to Linda Fabiani each of whom have been kind enough to join us on Scotland Counts this afternoon and this evening, as we've watched and commented and experienced the results of a Scottish election unlike any that we've seen before. I'm very grateful to everyone for their contributions and their thoughts and their input and their insight, without which this programme would not have been the same. I'm mindful that this election is being played out, is being counted, and will be reported very much as a game of two halves. We have heard so far, we've heard 44 constituency seats declared this afternoon. Tomorrow we will have the remaining 25 constituency seats, and of course all of the list seats in the D'Hondt system will be declared. And so we will be returning for the second half of the reporting of the 2021 Scottish Parliamentary Elections from midday tomorrow. However, as matters stand just now, we have the SNP have increased. They have won 3 seats and are standing on 36. The Lib Dems have held 4 seats and are remaining on 4. The Conservatives are on 3 seats, having lost 2. And the Labour Party have held 1 seat. So very much there is a great deal. A great deal will be confirmed and completed and concluded tomorrow, and as I say, which we will report on Broadcasting Scotland on the second part of Scotland Counts from 12 noon midday tomorrow, Saturday the 8th of May. But in the meantime, I'm very grateful, as I say, to Linda and Siobhan, who are with me just now. I'm very grateful indeed to Kate, who joined us earlier. And I'm also very grateful to everyone who's been watching us this evening. We enjoy making these programmes, and they are focused very much on our audience. We hope that we've produced a little bit of a different voice and a different perspective on this year's Scottish Holyrood election. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope you're able to join us tomorrow from 12 noon. But for the meantime, I hope you have a very good evening.